So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackie Longodding, and I am the Executive Director for the Committee on Accreditation for Neurodiagnostic Education. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking about retention and looking at some strategies for helping you keep your students. And the primary presenters today are going to be Kelly Trice, who is the Program Director at the Institute of Health Sciences and also the Chair of the COA-NDT, Diane Leeson, who is a board member and the Chair of the Program Director, rather, of the NDT program at Lincoln Land Community College. So Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
It helps if I unmute myself. All right, Jackie, I can't move the slides forward.
Oh, okay, I'll do them. Sorry.
That's okay. So just some of the things that we're going to talk about today, just so you have an idea of whether it's relevant for you. We're going to talk about retaining students in our NDT programs. And retention is something that we all find very challenging. Once they enroll, there's all kinds of issues that occur with students, some having to do with grades, others not. So we're going to delve deeply into what it takes to retain students. Also, there's a national shortage of neurodiagnostic techs. So one of the ways to address that issue is to have graduates that enter the workforce that are competent and ready to work. We're going to talk a little bit about proactive, or what we call, I call intrusive advising, what it is, methods to implement, and strategies that we can use to try and enhance retention. And then we're going to take a look at some of the analytics and the factors related to retention and steps to develop action plans and to address those factors and how they all apply to the standards and guidelines for our programs. So things that we hope to go over are to identify the standards that relate to retention. There are multiple standards, and sometimes it's not very clear when we're addressing standards what it applies to. So we're going to show the multiple standards that retention apply to. Again, we're going to describe proactive or intrusive counseling and how this can be used in a neurodiagnostic program. And we're going to have some case studies on how to develop action plans to address retention. So we're looking forward to this session. And you are all muted. So if you have questions, feel free to use the chat feature. Both Diane and I will be monitoring the chat feature, and Jackie. So as questions arise, we'll try and answer them as we go along. All right, so I guess we'll start with introducing ourselves. It's a very large group today, so we'll just take a few minutes just so everybody knows who everybody else is. I am the Program Director at the Institute of Health Sciences. It is a KHEP accredited program for distance education, and I am also the Chair for the Committee on Accreditation for Neurodiagnostic Technology. And I think what we'll go through is I can see the participants on my participant list. So I'll just go through and call on you, and you can just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and where you are. Jackie introduced herself, and Diane, I'll let you go first.
Hi, yes, I'm Diane Leeson, and I'm the Program Director at Lincoln Land Community College in Springfield, Illinois. We are an accredited program that is traditional Associate of Applied Science degree.
Okay. And Marge, I'm going to unmute you so you can introduce yourself next. Oh, can you unmute?
There you go. Hi, Kelly. My name's Marge Tucker. I'm the Program Director at the Kirkwood E&D College program. It is a traditional 2-year program. And I'm also the Director of the EEG lab there, which is very nice to have both responsibilities. It makes a lot of things a lot easier. And I am home today with my husband who just got a new hip. So I'm going to mute myself and hopefully be a nurse and listening today.
All right, Stephanie Jaramillo. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
I am a program director at Central New Mexico Community College. It's a fairly new program. We just started our second cohort. We are not yet accredited, but we just turned in our self-study and hoping to be accredited very soon. We are about a 1.5-year program. It's not a traditional 2-year, but a 1.5 years.
Great. Welcome to the group. Next is, let's see, Balajit.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Baljit Gill and I am the program director for the electroneurodiagnostics and polysomnography programs at Gateway Community College in Phoenix, Arizona. I've just recently taken the role on because Wendy Nugent, who was the previous program director, retired from that position. So I'm very new to this and I'm very excited about joining this program and working with everyone.
Well, welcome and good luck in your new role.
Thank you very much.
Next is Barb Weiser.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Barbara Weiser. I'm program director at the University of Holy Cross NDT program. We offer both associate and bachelor's degree tracks. We just admitted our 5th cohort and are an accredited program.
And you are in New Orleans, correct, Barbara?
That's right. Yes, in New Orleans.
Okay, well, welcome to the group. And George? George, I have you in here twice, so I don't know which one to unmute you. Let's see.
Yeah, I can. How's this? Is this working?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm George Jasinski. I am the program director at the Neurodiagnostic Technology program at Bellevue College in Bellevue, Washington. It's a 2-year program that awards an associate in arts. I work in conjunction with John Lott, who is the program chair of the program, and really happy to be here. Thanks for doing this.
Great, thank you. Next up is Heidi Hartle.
Good afternoon. I am Heidi Hartle. I am the program director and department chair of the Neurodiagnostic Technology program at Fox Valley Technical College in Appleton, Wisconsin. We recently have been KHEP accredited in January, and we have that NCS add-on, and hopefully we'll be adding an EP add-on in the future.
Great. Linda Kelly.
Hi, this is Linda Kelly. I'm the Director of Education at Asset. Asset's so pleased to partner with all the program directors and the COA-NDT for this presentation and some other upcoming events, as Jackie mentioned. As a former program director myself, I understand exactly where all you guys are at and what you go through every day. And so I'm happy to partner with you and help you guys along the way as much as we can here at Asset. And just a quick note, Kel, there's probably another Linda Kelly listed. I had to give somebody else my login because they didn't get the invite. So I sent them mine. So if you see Linda Kelly twice, the other Linda Kelly is probably Jen Buss.
Oh, good. And it doesn't look anything like you on the other one. All right, thank you. And we appreciate Linda's commitment to the educators. I think as a former program director, she is very sympathetic to our needs and is always looking at ways that Asset can help our neurodiagnostic technology program. So thank you. Jen, you're the other Linda logged in. Do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, we'll come back to you. Next is Maggie Marsh Nation.
Hi, everyone. This is Maggie Marsh Nation, and I'm the chair of the neurodiagnostic program at Baptist Health Sciences University. And we just started our second cohort this fall, and we have applied for accreditation but have not received it yet. And we have started a bachelor's program that will begin in January, and it's totally online. So we're excited about that.
Great, and we're excited to review your program. Nothing better to do in the midst of a pandemic.
Right, right. I'm counting on the virtual site visit.
All right, next is Margaret Barlow.
Hi, everybody. I'm representing Labrador College today. I'm going to have to leave early. We all are signing on to a new e-learning platform, Brightspace, and we're training on that. I'm actually the program director for the Interoperative Monitoring Program. We're a relatively newly accredited program in IONM. Also the assistant chair of the NDT department, and my other two team members, Jackie Polito and Baydone, can't come today because they're starting on the Brightspace now. I'll be joining them shortly.
All right, well, thank you for coming. Christy Fox. Christy, did I get you?
Yes, I've not introduced myself, no, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, they keep moving on my participant list.
You're fine. So I'm Christy Fox. I'm from Catawba Valley Community College in Hickory, North Carolina. We are a KHEP accredited program, and we have a traditional associate in applied science.
Great. Melissa Strewing.
Hi, I'm Melissa Strewing. I'm the program director for traditional seated 2-year associate's degree in electroneurodiagnostics at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. And we are a newly accredited during the beginning of the pandemic program.
And just kudos to Melissa. She's been working very hard to keep us educators connected. And we've been meeting on a monthly basis, and it's been a great experience. So thank you for doing that. Rhonda Rosenbaum.
Hi, my name is Rhonda Rosenbaum. I am the EDT instructor for Pamlico Community College in Grantsboro, North Carolina. We are an accredited distance education program. It is a 2-year program with graduates receiving an associate's in applied science.
Great, welcome. Tabitha Althoff.
I'm Tabitha Althoff. I'm actually a manager for Greater Milwaukee South within Advocate Aurora, and the program director for a traditional bachelor's program. We're actually expecting our first cohort that's doing their freshman and sophomore year right now. So we'll get them junior and senior year next fall. So we're excited to get the process rolling.
And you didn't tell us where you were, what program?
Oh, sorry, Carroll University. It's a co-partnership between Carroll University and Advocate Aurora Health.
Okay, great, welcome. Vicki Sexton. Vicki, are you there?
I'm here. It took a while for it to show up. Hi, my name's Vicki Sexton. I'm the program director for Grosier-Chester Medical Center, affiliated with Delaware County Community College in Upland, Pennsylvania. We are KHEP accredited in seated and in distance. We have a 2-year program, and they will graduate with an associate's in health science.
Great, thank you. Tabitha Lang.
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Tabitha Liang. I'm the program director of the NDT program at Orange Coast College in Costa Mesa, California. We have a traditional 2-year NDT program where our students graduate with an AS degree.
Great, welcome. Sarah Gardner.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gardner. I'm an adjunct with the MIRS program, and it's a consortium program out of Michigan. Glad to be here.
Great. And since we just did you, we're going to do Kimberly Patterson.
Hang on. Okay. Hi, I'm Kimberly Patterson. I am Program Director and Instructor for MIRIS Consortium's Neurodiagnostic Technology Program. We actually partner with 3 community colleges currently to offer our program, and we just started our 3rd cohort the beginning of this month, and we are an associate's degree.
Great. Jordan Rusk.
Hi, my name is Jordan Rusk. I am the program director of the NDT program and a polysomnography program at Alvin Community College in Alvin, Texas. I recently just took over the NDT program in June, and coming from you from my house in the middle of a tropical storm that we're getting. So,
my goodness. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's see who logged in. It keeps jumping around. Jen Botts. Jen, are you there?
I am.
Okay.
Yep, Jan Botts with the Clinical Neurophysiology Program at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, which is a 2-year program.
Good. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else I missed? Oh, somebody, B.A. Payne. I don't know who that is.
Hello, it's Kim.
Oh, that would be Beth Payne.
Oh, Beth, okay. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Beth?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Beth. I am the program director of a new neurodiagnostic program in Kinston, North Carolina. We are going to be seeking initial accreditation through COA NDT in the next year. And so we just wanted to participate in this meeting and see if we could get any good information and make contacts and stuff like that.
Great. Well, welcome. And what program?
For our associates in neurodiagnostics.
For which college? I'm sorry.
Lenore Community College.
Oh, Lenore. Okay, great. Welcome. And is there anybody else that I missed?
Hi, it's Ashley Hastings. I joined a little bit late.
Oh, you jumped to the top 8, Ashley. I'm so sorry. I missed you.
That's okay. I am the program director and instructor for a new neurodiagnostic technology program in Charlotte, North Carolina, through Carolina College of Health Science. We have an associate and a certificate track, and we actually have our first cohort graduating in December.
Welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, is there anybody else that we missed? All right, well then we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone. We're happy to have you as part of the workshop. So I think one of the first things when we talk about retention, one of the things that we look at in program development and then in moving forward in our program is our communities of interest and what their expectations are. So just, we can use the chat feature. Who do you think, from your point of view, are our communities of interest? And feel free to unmute yourself if that's easier. All right, so we have patients, I'm reading the chats, employers, students, great, all great answers. Anybody else that you might see as our communities of interest? Hospitals. Employers, great. And how do we meet the needs of these communities of interest? How do you include them in your program, in decisions that you make? Yeah, the key one is our advisory board meetings. So all of these people have a vested interest in our program one way or another, whether they're a student or a physician group or a hospital or employers. It's important to look at those communities of interest and find a means for them to have input. And the advisory committee is one of those key areas. And everybody's expectations, depending on what community of interest they represent, are a little different. So why do we care what they think, or why do we care about their input? What makes it important to us? Yeah, we want to meet their needs because we have an ulterior motive. We want them to support our programs. So in order for them to support our programs, they need to have some kind of buy-in. So it's just very important to know who your communities of interest are, try to get their input and their buy-in into your program. One of the things that we hear frequently on the COA is we look at your advisory committee meeting. We look at your members, we look at their participation, we review your minutes. And one of the things that's always the hardest, in my opinion, is that public member. Who to get for a public member and how to get them involved in your program. So just some things to think about. Jackie, do you want to make a couple comments about that?
Sure, thank you. Yes, I agree that it's really hard to get the public member. And if you look at our policy, we've defined what they are not, because it's easier to say what they are not than it is what they are. So they can't be like a faculty member who's retired, or a neurologist who's retired, or a relative of someone in your program, of one of your faculty members or your dean. We've found that some programs have very good luck with asking their medical director to recommend maybe the family of a patient, because they certainly are interested in having qualified, competent neurodiagnostic technologists when they need testing. We've had people get them from the Epilepsy Foundation. Some program directors have reported that they approach someone in their church, that there are always people in the church who are retired and who are looking to do these kinds of giving back to the community, and they're very interested in serving on advisory committees. So there are lots of ways to find someone. One would think it would be a whole lot easier than it ultimately is, but we do look for that on your advisory committee. And one of the ways that you can get your advisory committee, your public member, to be active is to give them a spot on the agenda, or ask them to do part of your review. For example, if you have them look at see if they want to look at your student surveys or your employer surveys from the public perspective, because they may see things that you might not think are important. We've all had that student from you know where, and we get the bad report back in, and we say, oh, that's just that person, and you don't do anything about it. But the advisory committee, the public member, may look and say, well, yeah, you had that this year, but you know, you had one last year and you had a couple the year before. Maybe this is something we need to look at. So if you need some help with trying to find an advisory committee, we can try and help you with that as well, in terms of giving you some suggestions about where you might want to go and look.
All right, so now we're going to start looking at retention, the whole purpose of this workshop. And Jackie's going to talk a little bit about retention and what it means for the COA and things that we should look out for.
So we looked to do a literature search to see if we could find an average retention in allied health programs. And it really wasn't very well defined. One of the things I remembered from several years ago was that there seemed to be some position that it was about 70% in nursing and allied health programs at the 2-year level. In the literature, we found everything from about 60% to 80%, and in some allied health programs as high as 92%. Those tended to be in baccalaureate programs where the first 2 years were gen ed and basic sciences, and the students didn't really start the allied health curriculum until the junior year. So they weren't required to report those first 2 years when students are really learning how to be a student and how to study. There's such a difference from a high school student coming into the community college or the technical college, and that first semester is a really overwhelming experience for them. People who are returning to work, midlife career changers, or people who have lost their job and are now being supported by the Labor Department to go and get a new career, and it takes a while. So for those of us in two-year programs, we do expect to see less of a lower percentage of completion. I did look at the SESI report, which is the National Student Satisfaction. I can't remember what the rest of it stands for. And of course, in community colleges in general, and I would argue this is probably true for colleges, two-year colleges that are not community college, but the SESI just looks at community colleges. And so the retention from year 1 to year 2 is about 41.2%. But we know that not every student who comes to the college is expecting to finish a degree. Sometimes they're just coming to take a course for enrichment, or they're taking a course because it will help them advance in their job. Or they're taking a course because they failed out at the university and they need to repeat some courses and then come back to the university. So there are lots of reasons that students do come. What we find in the allied health programs, though, is our students are generally much more goal-oriented, and we tend to see that they have higher retention. And so, again, as I said, they tend to see in that 60 to 80% range seem to be the most frequently reported statistic for retention in allied health. So the big question is always how to count. And so in the next few weeks, you should be looking for a new policy governing how to count for retention, because we realize that not every school is on the same playing field when they are reporting retention. There are some programs that as soon as a student enrolls in the program, they have to count them. There are some that they can withdraw within the first 2 weeks and they don't have to count them. Every school has a freeze date that on that day is the day you take your official count. And so we're looking to level that playing field for everyone. So for now, what we should be looking at is that the count should be on the last day that the college allows a refund for students who withdraw or drop out. Not the last day when students can withdraw with however your institution marks it on their transcript. It's just a W, a WP for withdraw passing, or WF for withdraw failing. And in some places, we say you want to look at the semester where that first course that includes the content that's required in our curriculum in Appendix B. So if you have a program where your first semester is all gen ed, so it's their English and their math and their psych and their computer course, that semester doesn't have to be counted for us. Now your school may have to have you count them. And we know that there'll be, in order to have this be best for you, and what we're really interested in is you may have to keep two counts. And I think Kelly can probably talk about that, because I think she has to keep 2 counts because of her institutional accreditation requiring it differently than the COA NDT. If you have a program where where they have to do the first semester and they can't get in, so they take, for example, an Intro to Allied Health course. And in that they have like things like CPR and emergency responses, those kinds of things that are required in our curriculum, then you would need to count that. So we're going to try and be much more clear with a policy on how you count for retention so that everybody will be counting the same. And you won't be talking with a friend and they're like, oh no, I don't count my students until week 13 because that's the last day that the students say that the college says they can withdraw. We don't want that. They went for the whole semester basically. And so they do need to be counted. So we'll try and be really clear, and that policy should be coming out probably within the next couple of weeks.
Jackie, somebody asked, is that the last day they can withdraw for a full refund?
Or any refund? Well, I think that's one of the things we have to think about when we write a policy, because you're right. There are some schools that if you sit down the first day, you only get 50%. There are other schools that if you withdraw in the first 7 days or 5 days, then you get 100%. So because schools have such varying refund policies, we want to try and make it so that it's fair for everyone. And so I think that's something that the committee will be discussing on when we try and come up with what should this policy be. I am so sorry.
And I know just for my program, we calculate differently. So for the state, for our creditors, if they're there for 7 days, on that 8th day, everybody counts. But for our CAP accreditation, if they withdraw within the first 4 weeks, then I don't have to count them because they haven't started their clinical rotation. Once they start, and it's just how our withdrawal policy works, but yours may be different. So as long as you're consistently doing it the same way, that's what's important, then it falls within the guidelines. So hopefully with the new policy, it'll make it much clearer for programs. Some programs, students, if they're there longer than 2 days, they don't get a refund and they're considered on the books. So it really depends a lot on college policies, program policies, and things like that. So we'll try and make that much clearer.
Right. And we're really looking at a lot of the other policies in the KHEP system on retention to try and see where's something that makes sense and that would be fair to everyone. And so
what's really not fair is for those programs that count them as they're enrolled in the NDT program and they've never taken an NDT course. They get to their second semester when they are first taking their NDT course, and you have 10 students that were enrolled from the previous semester and you've never seen them. So it's not really fair to have to count them when they've never officially been in your program.
Right. And I think that comes in, Kelly, I think it was back in 2012, there was a change in eligibility for financial aid in that you couldn't have a non-matriculating student and have them be eligible for financial aid. There were some rules that changed. And I know at the time I was working at a community college and it really hit our health programs very hard because we had a lot of students that would say, they would declare their major as an allied health program, for example, medical assisting or dental assisting or phlebotomy. And yet they weren't taking any of those courses because they were taking developmental math or developmental English. And so they couldn't get into the content courses, but they were on the books as that major. And our VP of Academic Affairs at the end of that first semester, when we had that, called me up and he's like, what's going on in your division? And I'm like, why? What are you talking about? And he's like, why do we have all these 300 people that are in medical assisting and half of them are gone from semester 1 to semester 2? And I'm like, well, first of all, we don't have 150 students in medical assisting either. I can tell you that because our capacity is 30 students. And so we started researching it and we found that for the first time, when you came in, the advisors would say, well, what do you want? What's your major? Oh, I want to get into the medical assisting program. Oh, okay, then that's your major. So it's really not fair for those programs that if you ask your registrar's office to pull your attrition, it may be quite different from what you have from the students who actually came in and sat in your classroom. And so we want to make it as fair to you as possible. And as I said, we want to make it so that everybody's on the same playing field and has the same rules rather than looking at so many different college rules about when you have to count them. Right. Any other question? So one of the things I learned when I took my first course in program evaluation, the professor always would say to us, when you're thinking about program evaluation, what you pay attention to gets better. And we've actually found that in NDT. Back in 2014, approximately half of the students that enrolled in NDT programs completed that course over the 3-year average, looking at the 3-year average. And of course, some years you have up, some years you have down. That's why KHEP looks at the 3-year rolling average. So we started paying attention to it because we were hearing how hard it was for people to find students who had gone to an NDT program to work, and they wanted people who'd gone to programs. And so we said, well, it's not so much of an issue of students who are enrolling, it's an issue of students who are finishing. And so we keep those statistics each year. And if some of you know, last year, for the first time, we hit over 300 graduates from your programs, which is really remarkable. This year, we're on track to be well over 300 graduates. And so, put my plug in here for the program directors, that's why we ask you to go ahead and fill out the information in the ARMS, the Annual Report Management System, because we get asked those questions frequently, not only from ASSET, but from graduate students who may be doing research for master's and doctoral degrees. We get asked for that information from program directors not program, deans, when you have a new program being developed, when they're doing their feasibility study. And so we do look at that on pretty much almost, I would say, a daily basis. I'm in that database for one reason or another. So the KHEP, our threshold for retention in KHEP, and this is something that the COA and DT did set, and it's 70% over a 3-year average. And so we feel like many of our programs are quite small. You may have enrollments in the single digits. And in those years, if you lose 1 or 2 students, it can really bring you down. But the next year and the year after, you may have more students, or you may have a higher retention. And so that 3-year average sort of accounts for that. What do you do about that 1 year where, you know, the local manufacturing facility shut down and husbands and wives lost jobs and the spouse couldn't continue to go to work because, go to school rather, because they didn't have the money, or you live near a military installation and you have people that are having their spouse constantly be deployed or transferred to a new base. And so that 3-year average helps mitigate that variability that can happen from year to year. So we looked at the statistics for retention for the last 3 years, and we looked at 24 programs with at least 2 years of data, because we have several new programs that only had maybe 1 year of data, or they hadn't put any data in yet because they're just graduating their first class. And we found that our 3-year average now is up to 81.9%. The 5-year average is 78.4%. But that, again, I think shows where we began to look, as the committee began to look at the retention much more critically after that eye-opening discovery in 2014. And so when you see the last 3 years, when the 2 years that are older in this 5-year average drop out, I think you're going to see this 3 and 5-year average really hover right around that 80% mark. So this is just a graph to show you we have everything up to 100%. A couple of programs have 100% retention, and some programs we have 3 that are down around 60%. But again, you can see that we do hover, and I was going to throw a mean line in there and I forgot. But you do see that we do hover between some programs being higher than 80%, some programs being a little bit lower than 80%, that we do hover right in around that 80%, which is excellent because it means that 8 out of 10 students who enroll in your programs are going on to graduate.
Jackie, quick question. Yep. Somebody wanted to know, what do you do for those students who graduate with an AS degree but then go on to their BS degree?
Perfect. So if they enroll as an AS degree student, then you would count them because you're accredited, your programs are, you have both on your accreditation. So if you have somebody who says, I'm only going to commit to doing an AS, and then they get in and they decide that, oh no, I want to get the BS, they got their AS, so you count them. And then they go on for the BS, and you're not going to count them in your retention because you've already counted them.
Great, thank you.
So Kelly mentioned that we were going to talk about the standards and why do we care as the COA. And of course, the reason we care as the COA is because of the standards. And we have to make sure that every program is demonstrating substantial compliance with the standards. And I think that's a key word, substantial. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It does mean that you have to be substantially, and of course people always ask, so what does substantial mean? And it means you need to be making good progress, that it's reasonable that you are going to get there. So we look at standard 4B, and it says the outcomes have to be assessed, and there are 5 outcomes, as you are aware, and the one we're going to focus on today is programmatic retention or attrition, because some programs, some committees on accreditation in KHEP use attrition rather than using retention because they're just the inverse of each other. And I guess for those of us who are the glass is half full kind of people, retention is a much more positive factor to look at than attrition in my mind. And then standard B2 requires you to report your outcomes. And so this is where you report those in your annual report. We look at them. And for those of you who don't get the achieve the outcome, you need to look at the analysis of why that's happening and do an appropriate action plan based on that analysis. And it's interesting because sometimes we have programs that don't quite get it every single year. And all of a sudden you'll have the program reviewer, because now the program reviewers stay with your program pretty much. And as long as they're on the board, we have to do some movements every once in a while, just because someone's workload may get really high and we need to move them around. But the reviewers will look and say, you know what, they just copy and paste that analysis and action plan every single year, and it's not working, and it hasn't worked. And so we do encourage you to, if you've got an analysis of why things are happening and you do your action plan and it doesn't work, then you need to go back and look and say, so why isn't this working? What more do we need to do? And then standard 2B says that if you don't meet them, you have to begin a dialogue with us. And this is where we now have started to think about accreditation as an ongoing process, rather than, thank God that site visit is over. I got 10 years of accreditation and I don't have to think about it for 10 years. Well, yeah, you do, because now it's an ongoing dialogue with the COA NDT. And so you will see that if you don't meet the outcomes, you may be asked to do a progress report. And then if the progress report doesn't get better, then you may be asked to do a focused site visit and maybe even have a focused self-study and maybe even have a focused site visit. So we realized too that sometimes programs may not know exactly what they should be asking when they're doing that analysis and looking at why is this happening. And so we adopted the use of a standard progress report back in March of 2017. And this is, and I have to admit that I've not been really strongly enforcing this, because if you put a good analysis and action plan in your annual report, I haven't been forcing people to go back and do this, but I think we're going to probably start to look at this a little more critically, because it is very helpful. And we adopted this from several of the other committees on accreditation in the KHEP system that also use standardized progress reports, or SPRs. And the link to this, because it's on SurveyMonkey, is in the email that comes, and it's also in the user's manual that comes. So when you log in to the SurveyMonkey, you're introduced, but this is the COA NDT SPR retention, because we do have one for another outcome as well. And then we thought about, so what are the things that cause people to leave the programs? And first of all, we wanted to look at academic reasons. Now we know that sometimes you have other than academic reasons. Sometimes it's professional. We ask you to segregate that out in your enrollment and retention tab in the ARMS. But we really felt like we wanted to look at academic reasons. And so we start with that. And so, one of the things is, do you have a specific program, course that gives the students, that's sort of like, that is just the red line course that people can't get past. And sometimes people don't identify that. And I was speaking with Kelly and Diane yesterday when we were going over all this material, and I was saying I was working with a program a couple of years ago, and that program historically had less than 20% retention in their program. And of course the COA was asking them to do a fair amount of work on that. So I had a phone conference with the campus president, with the program director, the dean of academic affairs, and their accreditation administrator. And so I said to them, where do the students fail out? Where do they get to and they're gone? And they were like, oh, the 6th term. And I said, oh, okay. And what about that 6th term? Well, that's when they got the first NDT course that was taught by the program director. And I said, okay, so let's take a look at that. And so the program director was immediately like, well, that's my course. There's nothing wrong with that course. I'm like, well, okay, let's think about this. If 80% of your students get to that point in the curriculum and they're getting A's and then they fail, we need to take a look at that course. And so at that point, the administrator jumped in and said, you've told us that they don't know how to do math, and so we've increased the math requirement of the program. And the students, I'm looking at their curriculum plan, and they're taking like 3 math courses before they get there. And so at the end of the day, we came out that they really needed to, and it was like a 9-credit course. I mean, I think the person had followed the nursing model and had that first semester or that first course rather in NDT, after the students had already were in 6 terms and had spent that amount of money plus the opportunity cost, and now they had a course that was combined as lecture, lab, and clinical. And once you failed that course, you could not recover your GPA unless you took it over again. And so, and of course, that also brings in issues with who's going to pay for that. And so they did decide that they would divide the course out and have lecture, lab, and clinical separately, and also look at the content. And so ultimately, the program decided that the college decided that they were going to close the program. But I think that, that was a real eye-opener that, wait a minute, students get through 5 terms, they get to the 6th term, and now they, 8 out of 10 of them can't get through this one course. So that was a real eye-opener for them. Then, of course, we know that we tell students how hard our programs are and how much time they're going to have to submit or spend on their homework. And then when they start going to clinical, and they don't hear it, they think, oh, I'm a good student. I've always had A's. And so I think that's something that we can kind of talk about, is how we get students to realize that this is true, that you will have to study very differently in this program, and you can't just memorize it and regurgitate it anymore. You're going to have to be applying this, especially when you get into lab and clinical. I've worked with one program that they actually did a video of their students talking about this, and they show that in the orientation, and then they show it again in the first day of class. One of the things, and most of my career was in community colleges, and I am a strong advocate of the community college being open access. Having said that, I am not a strong advocate of students getting into these allied health programs when they don't have a chance of passing. And so one of the things we ask is, does your program use an admissions test? For example, the TEAS or some of the other exams that are out there. I particularly like the TEAS because you can identify the sections in the TEAS that you want to use. Again, the company has a lot of analytics. Most of them are nursing because so many more programs use it for nursing, although their allied health information is starting to get quite robust. And then you can look and you can decide what things are most important for students coming into an NDT program, what sections, and you can set pass rates for each of those individual sections, or you can just set an overall pass rate. And I think those are really good tools for the program to use when you're realizing that your students get into my courses and they can't read because our books are written at the grade 13 level, or they can't do the math. And Diane has some really neat things afterwards to talk about in terms of the math. And then asking, can there be changes? And sometimes that's really hard to be able to get your college to agree that they have to change the way they admit students to our NDT programs. One of the things I always say to program directors when I'm working with them on this is that ask them what the nursing admissions procedure is. I can guarantee you, you don't walk off the street and get into the nursing program. And so if you can do it for one program, then you can do it for other programs as well. And then trying to find, program directors know what they need to change in the admissions process. And then I think sometimes when you get down and you really sit and do this standardized analysis, then you can really be able to create a nice, strong argument to be able to make those changes that need to be made changed. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to talk about advising. Oh no, it's still me, I'm sorry. So when we start talking about advising, we know that we have professional advisors in many of our college campuses. and other colleges, it's the faculty who do the advising. But if you want to do some research and look at advising, one of the things that one of the theories that will come up very often is Tento. He actually has some theories back from the 70s, but I particularly like the model that he created and published in 1993, which is called the social integration model. And I think it's really good because it shows how many variables go into students being able to either finish the program or drop out of the program. And it's not just the grades, but it's also looking at, the families. How much family support do they have coming into the program? I think for us, because we're dealing with adult students, if you look at the Malcolm Knowles the adult learning theory, it really helps you to look at the individual and help them identify and set their goals. And clearly their pre-college student makes a difference. You know, for students who come to us that, you know, they are midlife career changers and they haven't been in a math course since 9th grade or 10th grade. And then they really, it's not that they don't know the math, it's that they've forgotten the rules. And then looking at how you have support from the social systems, from your family, from your employer, and support from the college, the academic system, and really trying to also make sure that you're always looking at that commitment to the goal. And our students are goal oriented. They're not coming in and saying, oh, I don't know why I'm in this program. I got to find what I want to be. They know they want to be a neurodiagnostic technologist. And identifying those things and trying to break them getting to that dropout decision. Another theory around advising that I find very, very helpful is Bean and Metzner, and they really did their work with non-traditional students, which is very applicable to us in NDT and in allied health in general, but specifically since we're working with NDT today, looking at our NDT. And again, it's looking at the environment, looking at what is their social environment? What is their family environment? We often find students that they can't study at home because they don't have a quiet place to go. So can you have a place in the college? Is it open the evenings, for example, or weekends so that they can come and use the library? What is their background? What is their academic background, social background, economic background? And again, for many of us who are working in community colleges, we're working with students that are challenged in all three areas. They're educationally challenged, they're socially challenged, and they're academically challenged. And so sometimes our students, and again, I don't see this very often when I'm looking at the retention data that you guys submit in the ARMS, you're not losing a lot of students for professional behavior. So that tells me that you guys do a really good job of orienting your students to what are the expectations when you get into the hospital environment. And then again, Bean and Metzner really focused on the social integration. And I think sometimes people are thrown aback with social integration because they're saying, our students are adults, they come to school, they work, they have families. They're not going to be involved in clubs and they're not going to be involved in the activities that our student services departments do. But social integration really has a much broader implication here in that how do they react with the faculty? How do you have students, and I've done a lot of site visits over my career in several disciplines, and you often go into do a site visit and you hear the students saying, you know, they hate the school, but they love their faculty, they love their program. And so that's when you have faculty who really do a good job of building on the theories in social integration. And then the final one I'm going to talk about is Cabrera, Castaneda, and Nora. And they really looked at Tento and Bean and Metzner and said, let's pull the most important things out of the two of them. And for them, social integration was the absolute most important thing in student success. The second most important thing was family support. If you have a student whose family is not supportive of them coming to school, there's just not a whole lot you can do to keep them in because they're just not going to be able to keep up. When the family starts pulling on them, when they don't have support from their employer, then they will get to the point where they just can't do it anymore. The GPA is certainly important, but you know, if they graduate your program, they should have a reasonable expectation they're going to pass their boards and they should be able to get a job. And so, you know, I'm never too concerned about the student who is getting B's or C pluses. I'd be a little concerned about a student who only gets to C's because, you know, the way we do exams, if your students are only getting C's ever, and they're always 1 point away from failing, then I would be a little concerned about that student and I'd want to do some interventions. And you'll see some of that coming up very quickly. And then again, the institutional commitment is still important, but more important for us, I think, is that commitment to the program and how they love their program and they don't care much about the institution because they're adult students and they're coming to school and their focus is getting through the program and they don't really care what else is going on at the college. They're not going to football games or baseball games or soccer games. that you might see from students who are in some of the more, I guess I can say it because I was a social science major. So you can look at social sciences and the not so, they are the ones who have time to go and do those things. Once you get into allied health courses, you don't have time to do those things. So one of the things, and when I first learned about this, it was called intrusive advising, and now we call it proactive advising. And the whole organizing framework with proactive or intrusive advising is that you want to connect with your students before they're in trouble. So you want to identify the students that are at risk and start to build that relationship with them. And again, Kelly and Diane are going to have some excellent examples in a few minutes of how they do this. But you can use, if you're using a learning management system, your learning management system, all of the ones that I'm familiar with, have extremely good power at analytics, student analytics. And so you can use that, work with your advising center that can teach you how to do some of those things, how to look and see where are the things that might indicate to you that your students are going to be in trouble before they actually get in trouble. So one of the authors who writes a fair amount about proactive advising, and I particularly like an article from 1988 where he talked about it's a deliberate intervention. You can have your college have all these overarching programs to keep students enrolled, because this is a big issue now for every college, that you want to retain your students, that those overarching theories or those overarching programs are good, but you have to deliberately intervene with your students. And so, yes, there's a math lab and there's a reading lab and there's a writing lab, but sometimes it takes us telling the student that you need to go to the math lab and having some way that you enforce them going for that help before they'll actually go. Making sure that your students feel like you care about them and their success. We've actually had sometimes where students file complaints through KHEP about the faculty who are not treating them nicely. And as Kathy McGivern, who's the executive director of KHEP, said to me one day when I said, if half this stuff is happening, something needs to go, something needs to change here. And she's like, well, unfortunately, Jackie, we don't have a standard that says faculty have to be nice to their students. But we do know that if the students get along with the faculty and they feel that the faculty are wanting them to be successful and are really doing everything they can to help them be successful, then they are more likely to be successful. Again, looking at that proactive or intrusive advising really helps your students identify options. And I worked in a community college, many of you do. My community college was in the only majority minority city in Massachusetts. We were the third poorest city in Massachusetts, and the community college campus was plopped right down in the middle of it to try and break the cycle of poverty. Many of our students didn't know how to access resources in the community. So we would be able to help them say, what are your options here at the college? Or where can we get you help in the community? And so working with the social service agency, helping our students find a way to be able to stay in school. And sometimes it was only a $50 emergency loan. Sometimes it was a taxi voucher that we could get for them. And then really the whole linchpin of intrusive advising is getting into the students before they get into major trouble where they can't get out no matter what they do. Just anticipating those challenges and helping those students get in and figure out a path so that and how they're going to do it. Not only a path, but what do I need to be able to be successful on this path? And so, again, Diane and Kelly have some really good examples about how they do intrusive advising. I think it's really a good thing to read about. So if you have time, NACADA, which is the Global Community for Academic Advising. It used to be, NACADA was their professional organization and then they changed it. So they have a really good resource area for you. And I've given you the link, the slides will be available so you can go and look up things. And most of the time their articles are very easy to read. So I would encourage you to spend some time looking at intrusive advising or proactive advising if you want to be nice. people just didn't like the word intrusive. So now it's really changed to most of the things. If you Google it, you're going to get most of the stuff on proactive advising, and they'll say formerly known as intrusive advising. So at this point, I'm gonna, how long have we been going? An hour. Kelly, do you want to start now, or do you want to take a 10-minute?
Well, why don't we do the next 2 slides, and then we'll take a break before we
Okay.
start going over the forms.
Okay.
And Jackie, maybe you can copy that link and put it in the chat session so people
Oh,
will
sure.
have it.
Yeah, I will do that. I'll do it on the break.
Okay. So just a few things. It's important to look at your entire program and develop strategies for improved retention. I think one of the reasons that our program's retention pre-COVID was really high was because we implemented a lot of policies to help our students. Saying that, we had really high retentions, but COVID has really put a damper on things for students, and for different reasons. I mean, we thought originally when we all went, we are already an online program, and originally we thought, well, if the students aren't in clinicals and everything's online, they're going to have so much more time to do their work. Well, that wasn't necessarily true. We didn't take into account that their spouse was home because they were furloughed. Their 4 children were home and trying to learn online, and they had no place to be in their house to be able to do their work. So, I mean, it's in theory, it sounded really good when you said, oh yeah, they're going to have these extra 16 hours to do all this work. It just didn't really work out that way. And I spend a lot of time telling students, you know, we're in the midst of a pandemic. We've never dealt with these situations before, and we're just going to have to roll with it. But the strategies that we do use for improved retention involve all aspects of our program. We look at before our students enroll, when they're ready to start, before they go to clinicals, and then different steps throughout the program. So some programs have, like Jackie said, they have testing as part of their admission requirement. We do not. We do have a few things that we require, and one is that every student that applies to our program has to have a meeting with an advisor, and it's what we call our Q&A. And we review their application, their grades, and we spend a lot of time telling them about the program, the academic courses, what's involved in being a neurodiagnostic technologist, the amount of work that they'll have to do, specifically because we're an online program. And anybody that hasn't taken an online program, the misconception is that it's so much easier. I will tell you that that is not true. Having taught in both a seated and an online program, our online students work harder than any students in a seated program. And it's because the expectations are higher, and because we have multiple reporting structures, our students have to document not that they're online, but they're completing assignments, that they're making forward progress. So it is a lot of work for our students. They may only have 3 or 4 assessments in a seated program in a semester. And in our program, they have 25 or 30 assessments in a semester. So it is a lot of work. So we do the Q&A prior to enrollment. The other thing that is required is that students are required to shadow. And the shadow is really important because it allows students to see what the daily duties of a neurodiagnostic technologist are, that they're going to have to measure, apply electrodes, be exposed to collodion and acetone, different types of patients, different areas of the hospital. And it's not all fun and pleasant. So it's important for them to be able to go in and see that and get a better understanding. I do have students that come back after the shadow and say, I thought this was different. I don't think I'm really interested in the program. And we would much rather them figure that out ahead of time than after they started the program. We also make sure that they have all their prerequisites done prior to the program. If they can't get their prerequisites done, then they're never going to be able to do what they need to do in the program. Oh, I didn't have time to do my drug screen. Oh, I haven't made an appointment for the doctor yet. if you can't get it together to get the prerequisites done, they're never going to succeed in the program. So it's just another indicator to us that maybe they're not meant to be in the program. When they start, we do an orientation. We go over everything that we've gone over before. We ensure that they have a good understanding of what's involved in the program, the number of courses that they need to take, their grades. They also had a prerequisite course that they had to take to make sure that they could manage and manipulate through the course management system. Then we do an orientation before they go to clinicals to make sure that they're clinic ready. We also take different steps throughout the program, and some of these we'll show you later on as far as attendance. So attendance for online learning is not just logging in, it's showing forward progress and completing assignments. So if I get a notice from a faculty member that a student didn't submit assignments and they're out of attendance, I immediately contact them. They get an email. I've been notified by one or more of your instructors that you have an unexcused absence. Is there something going on that I should be aware of? If it happens a second week in a row, then I'm on the phone and I call the student, and then we'll try and figure out what's going on. We also have weekly documentation. When they are at their clinical sites, there's a form that has to be filled out weekly. They're evaluated on a weekly basis. In addition, we do progress reports at the mid-quarter point. So at 6 weeks, they get a progress report. And if they have any grades below 70%, then they're required to go through what we call our SAP, our Student Academic Progress Plan. And it's an inclusive process. It's with the faculty member, me, the program director, and the student. And a plan is developed for them to be able to succeed over the next 6 weeks and bring their grades up to passing. And then if the struggle is with them not doing their clinical work, then I pull the clinical site faculty in and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. What are you seeing? What's going on? This is what they're submitting. And you're saying that they're doing a great job, but I have that their grades are in the 50s. Where's the disconnect? So it is a comprehensive method to ensure that students are making forward progress along the way. And it is very intrusive. I know people like to call it proactive, but it is intrusive. If they're not doing what they're supposed to do, the faculty's involved, I'm involved, their clinical site's involved. So everybody's involved to ensure the success of the student, and sometimes they just can't make it to that next point. Other things that we've done throughout the program, especially due to COVID, we've tried to add things that we think that will help the students. So things that we've done is we've started weekly live sessions as well as the other lectures that they have. We've added one-on-one tutoring with a graduate from the program that's familiar with the curriculum and is different from the course faculty they deal with on a regular basis. And all these things have helped students show that we're interested in their success. But there are students, sometimes everybody else is interested in their success, but they're not taking it seriously. So those are people that we can't save. But then there's the ones that with just a little bit of prompting, a little bit of interaction with a faculty member or tutor, go through and just excel through the rest of the program. All right, so one of the communications is big in our program. It's also really big in Diane's program. So Diane's going to talk a little bit about the communication records and what they do at Lincoln Land.
Hi, yes. Currently, a few years ago, our college began focusing on those same things, completion records, completion rates for even the Gen Ed courses and those programs, as Jackie was talking about earlier. And they kind of implemented several programs, early alert systems, success coaches, but that doesn't always cross over to health professions, because many of our students come in and they have been in the community college system for several years, taking many gen ed courses hoping that something would stick. So by the time they reach a health professions, they've got all of those gen eds out of the way, and they might not kind of get caught into that early alert program to have a red flag, so to say, by the college. And the college has many, many resources, but students don't always take advantage of those on their own. So we mentioned, you know, like the math skills labs and the success office, coaches, counselors. But sometimes students just don't really see that, or they see it as something else they have to do when they already don't have time. So we're going to look at a few of the ways that we kind of use documentation with our students after we've kind of identified some concerns that we have. And ultimately, we hope that leads to kind of some improved retention. So we've been doing some of this for a few years, and it just helps get the students more involved, and even if we kind of help them create the time to use those resources, and how we kind of get them to also participate. We also do many of those pre-enrollment type sessions. We use Blackboard, and so students always have access to Gradebook, and we use Gradebook for all of their courses, but again, we've realized that not all students really keep track of that, so they need us to really help. One of the things that we use is a communication record. This just documents all of our communication with students. And this is kind of typical. It used to be maybe a disciplinary report, but again, we're kind of going on that positive communication. So, but you'll still see that communication records are very one-way communication. We type up a record of communication. It's routine documentation. We give it to the students about maybe our concerns or where they're at, if it's kind of some check boxes there, if it's academic or attendance, and then they usually just sign it. They rarely give a comment, or sometimes they'll say, I'll do better, but there's not really a whole lot of buy-in from the student. It's just very one-way communication. So you see, we use this just for like the routine documentation, but it doesn't really give any buy-in from the student. Next slide.
So Diane, do you fill these out for every type of communication that you do with the student, every time you have a conversation with them?
Yes, if it has anything to do with any of those categories. So now if a student has one absence, we might not fill that out. We have an attendance policy, which is 15 absences throughout the program. 5-semester program, it's pretty generous at about 3 a semester. If we do see a student start to, you know, have 2 within the first 3 weeks, we'll start a communication record, just so we have documentation that we let them know, you know, we're recognizing those absences and that type of thing. It's just, this builds us that file if we need it later, and it kind of gives us that documentation. So we do a lot of communication records.
All right, and next we're going to talk about success plans, but I think this is probably a good time to take a short break, if everybody's okay with that. Jackie, if you'll just mute everybody, and it's 2:15, so why don't we take a break till 2:30, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about success plans. Does that work for everybody? All right, we'll see you back here at 2:30. All right, we'll get started.
Jackie, can you go to the last slide?
Yes, hang on a minute. Oh, sorry. There you go.
Can you go to the one previous? I had a question if the student's progress was documented through the communication record. So I guess yes and no. So just a little backstory on like this communication record in particular. We just identified the student was having a problem in clinical. So our first semester is spent in the lab and on other didactic courses. And the lab is practicing the 10-20, very safe environment. A lot of the students progress just fine, about a few weeks apart, some of them. And but ultimately at the end of 16 weeks, in a very, controlled area, they seem to all get it by the end. And then this student then was identified in the second semester as not being able to, when you get that call that they can't measure. So then we did that evaluation, realized it may have been kind of part of it was that they aren't doing their math and calculating the 10 and 20% correctly, or, with patients there and a time, and that now they have a time on it. So we just have kind of developed an action plan with that student. We thought just with some concentrated help, it would make her successful. And you can see that we gave kind of some daily homework to do, some practice forms to take home that she had to do daily. And then 1 week later, we met to discuss the progress. Did she do the work? Was she fulfilling her end of the agreement? And then a following week, then we would do the assessment again. And so it's not necessarily documented then if it's positive progress, because this would just go in our chart. Maybe if it's a recurring issue, we would then see that pattern of behavior. But if she's successful, we wouldn't really document that because it would have been documented in kind of grade book. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so success plans. So before we start going through the success plans, what are success plans? How do you implement them? Well, success plans are a way to provide a path for students to be able to succeed. It helps us as educators determine why the students aren't being successful. Is it academics? Is it something else that's going on? And then we try to develop a plan, what can be done for the students to be able to demonstrate that they're being successful. Success plans are hard work. It sounds like it's an easy fix. It really isn't. It's hard work for everybody involved, and you have to have buy-in not only from the student, but a lot of times you have to get buy-in from the faculty, get faculty input, sometimes even clinical site input, and it requires follow-up. So, I mean, if you only have a few students that you're doing success plans for, that's great. I'll tell you, I started 47 students a couple weeks ago. So if you have to do more than 10 success plans, it's really difficult and time consuming, but I think it's very beneficial to the students. It's beneficial to you as a program director or an educator. And I can honestly say it's made me a better program director because I get to see why students aren't succeeding and help them develop and improve. And some students don't. I mean, the success plans are not successful, but at least we've made an effort, we've documented it, and we've tried to help them succeed in the program. So now we're going to go through and look at some things that we use in our programs and talk about some of the other reasons.
And Kelly found this slide, and I think it's really great because it does kind of give that visual as how, we see success just as a tip of the iceberg. But what we really don't see is all of the things that are going on underneath the surface that either they're dealing with at the same time or that's hindering their progress to get to that success. So for our program, we've kind of used success plans in addition to the communication record. Like I said, the communication record is kind of that one-way communication. We're documenting and giving it to the student. Sometimes they take it serious, but that's just our form of documentation. We use the success plan as kind of to identify problems. If we see there's maybe one of those underlying problems under the surface there, like on that slide, it's an early intervention. It gets the students involved, and we call it the two-way communication. So it's communication and an educational tool. It's corrective feedback, but it also promotes student success with their participation in it. They have to kind of do some pieces of the success plan. So while it is a lot of work for faculty or myself, it does put some of the work on the student. And someone asked how we ensure that the student does their part, right? So it doesn't become that one-way communication. And I'll go over this later, but it becomes a ticket to test. So they have to complete their portion of the success plan in order to test. So they bring it back as they're completed as their ticket to get back into class. It is faculty driven, and a lot of times like Kelly said, if you have 4 of them even to do in a week, on top of course prep and maybe midterms and other things, it can be kind of a daunting task. We kind of all participate together, so sometimes I'll know some of the factors and I can help drive the document also and kind of help the faculty in that way too. For us, we have kind of our way of having students ensure that they participate in all portions of the class. So not only doing their assignments and quizzes, homework, labs, and competencies. Every weighted area on the syllabus, our minimum grade for passing is a 75%. So the students have to complete each of those weighted areas and able to be eligible to sit for the exam, the final exam. If not, then they don't pass the course. So that's one of our areas to ensure that, you know, somebody's not just blowing off their assignments, because they're obviously important as the whole also. So we kind of use that as one of our early indicators also. If someone's not doing a couple of the assignments, maybe because they're only worth 10% of their grade, we'll do a success plan to ensure, because now they've fallen below 75% in assignments.
And Diane, you use they have to pass every section, correct?
Right. So in order to sit for the final exam, and it's in our handbook, and several of the other programs are now using that also, because we kind of, you know, when you identify a problem, you look for ways to fix it later. So we identified that as one of the problems where it seemed a lot of people weren't doing assignments as much because they were kind of worth 10%. So we would change the weighting, but that didn't really make sense either. So we liked that everybody, they had to get 75% in each weighted area in order to sit for the final. So you have to pass your assignments with the 75%, pass your quizzes with the 75%, and that allows room for, you know, there's always a student that either misses an assignment or does poorly on a quiz, but their overall grade at the end of the semester has to be 75 in each category.
Yeah, and we have a similar policy. We had students that were choosing not to take the final exam because they were passing the class. So then we implemented a new policy where the final exam is a course requirement, and that if they chose not to take the final exam, they could not pass the class without taking the final, regardless of their overall course grade.
Right, and we found that with attendance also. How do you do attendance? It's difficult to grade papers behind, you know, when they're due is one thing, but then to always have late assignments, and we do a progressive attendance policy. So it's 10, 20, 50. So your first absence is a 10% reduction. Your second absence is a 20% reduction, because we still want to encourage completion, because the assignment is, or the quiz is very important to the whole. But the third and subsequent absences in that semester is 50% reduction. So 50 is better than a 0. Okay, next. One of our early identifiers from kind of that sample before about the student that ended up getting to clinical but then seemed to be struggling with measurements was that we assumed everybody came in with kind of some basic math skills. We have an admission policy, they meet with advisors, and we do have a minimum math that they have to meet. Right now we don't use the TEAS or the HESI exam. We do have other programs that are using those. We just have not adopted it yet for our program, but we do have a minimum math requirement that they have to test out of to get into the program. But still, that seems to be almost not a true reflection of math skills in the classroom. So on day one, we give a percentages assessment, and this is number 2. So the number 1 is actually quite a bit more extensive, and it's the first thing they get with a 15-minute time, and just to kind of see where people are at with percentages, because we just assumed that people knew percentages because we didn't teach math. So if they don't pass the first attempt, we give homework to take home that week, and then they get the assessment the following week, a different assessment. After 2 attempts, then we do a success plan that refers them to the math skills lab. So we'll actually send their competencies to the math skills lab because they know how to identify problems and work with them to get their percentages down, and then they have to kind of come back with the success plan with that ticket. They get their ticket back to lab. So yeah, we've kind of developed this, and it's become very successful. So sometimes, you know, they might miss the first competency just because they're in shock that they were kind of given that on the first day. And then after some homework, and then they realize, okay, I do have my percentages, they pass their second competency with no problem, and then they're able to move on to measure. So here's kind of an example of our success plan. So you'll kind of see from this document, it's a couple pages long, and it actually is much more detailed than the communication record because we do have that student participation in this. So it's a communication and educational tool. It's providing corrective feedback and promoting success. So we just had some blocks there of some common things or things that might lead to a success plan, and that way we can just kind of check which one. Typically for us it's unsatisfactory course grades, and that's what we're trying to determine. Is it really the courses, or is it something else going on that we can get them some additional resources through the college or community to help them become successful? So you'll see here that we outline what the reason for the success plan is, and then we give it to the student, and they have to fill out this area here. They have to identify obstacles that led to the referral. So they need to identify 2 obstacles that they faced. And there are some kind of examples in there that they can use, and we can always tell too how much participation and how in-depth they fill this out, and reflective that they are on how successful then also that they might become. And then they have to also find solutions, because many times we often assume what they're going through, or we assume the solutions for them, but this puts them in control and kind of makes them really understand that we are there to help them succeed. So this student obviously felt like he was working too many hours, and that he really didn't practice much in between. So one of his solutions was that he would stop working weekends, and then he would take time.
So you use the same form for behavioral issues as well?
Right. Many times they're not, those are kind of communication records too, and may not be a success plan. Behavioral could be just kind of professional behaviors, you know, maybe they show up late or they don't use the appropriate methods to call in. You know, some of them will kind of bypass kind of the chain of command, and so we will use a success plan for that and let them know that it's probably a handbook violation. They're not using that, those type of success plan communication. So these are the two forms that we use. These are not part of their, we still do the semester evaluations. So we also do professional behavior evaluation, but those are just their semester kind of evals that we do on them. We have different boxes that we can check. So this is referring the student to the academic success professional. So that's a college resource that helps them identify like time management skills, study techniques, and some habits that they could use. Not applicable in case maybe we just are wanting them to identify their problems and also offer solutions. But this student we felt like should go to academic success for some of those, to kind of just talk to them to get counseled. Other times we might have them meet with, you know, the math skills lab. We'll just kind of add that in. The faculty comments, this is where the faculty need to be fairly detailed because, you know, we need the academic success professional to also kind of have an idea what's going on, because the student has to take this form with them. And just so you can see where the student, you know, is just not really completing their quizzes. The quiz average was hovering right at a 75%, but it was 74.1. So they have to maintain a 75 or above. And then assignments were down to 40%. So they were really just, when he did complete them, right, he completed them well, A's and B's, but then he would do some and just blow them off and get a 0, which really does get your average down quickly. And then of course his course grade overall then fell to a 73 also. So this, like I said, is one way that we use the success plan to help them identify their problems, let them take some of the ownership into it, and we're just not reporting to them. And then in a minute, we'll see at the very bottom, which is that ticket to test. And we get signatures, and then they have to be collected and turned in. Here was another one. Again, these were just some personal issues. It says personal family and legal issues. Again, we had no idea that was going on in this student's life. So this was a student that was very good. He was always studying, stayed after class, did study groups, used office hours, so we couldn't really determine what was going on, what was the reason why he just was not passing, because every indication led us to the fact that he studied the most. And you can see there was just so many outlying things there that he couldn't concentrate.
Diane, somebody had a question about success plan meetings. How are you doing them with COVID if students aren't at the school?
Yeah, so our students still are coming. We're doing small groups for lab, so our students are there. We also do the remote classes. So this would get filled out, and then they would have to meet with those departments. And all of the college departments are also doing Zoom, or they do team meetings. So they can still fill these out and get them back to you, even with you know, email signatures. We always will check in with academic success and make sure that they had their meeting and fulfilled their requirement. That student, we felt he could meet with the academic success professional, but at the same time, we really didn't feel that he needed any kind of study skills because we kind of knew he did study so much. And then after seeing what kind of things he was struggling with. We decided that he would set up some extra sessions to kind of do some reviews, and then using office hours and that type of thing would just kind of get him back focused on some one-on-one time, just through his kind of personal things that were going on to make him successful. So the faculty made the comments there about his grades, and he was not meeting our benchmark to sit for the final. And after meeting with those, you can see at the very bottom, here's our ticket to test. So this is kind of how we ensure that completion, right? So yeah, we give it to the student. They're like, yeah, whatever. They'll take it. Thanks for letting me know I'm failing, and they'll file it away in their car. But the ticket to test is what's important, because it ensures completion. And then they review it, and they have to turn it in then to me on the final, kind of the final step. So even with COVID, and you could still do this virtual. So we have virtual office hours. Our courses are done not really online. We're calling it remote. So they still meet at the same time every week as if the class met in person, and it meets on Zoom. So even though their class is at 9 o'clock every Friday, they still meet at 9 o'clock on Zoom, just not in the classroom. So we can still see them every week. And then we might
do they have to have a code to be able to take the test? Or is it live? They have to hand you the ticket?
So yeah, that paperwork is their ticket back to test.
Okay.
So, resubmitting the success plan back to us. And so online, you would just not open the test on Blackboard or whatever online platform you have for that test.
Mm-hmm.
Which usually prompts them to reach out why they can't access the test. And then you have that discussion that they haven't quite fulfilled their requirements yet. And then if they haven't got it done, then it becomes late. So then they're subject to the 10%, 20, or 50% reduction based on which absence that was. So yeah, you can make your ticket to test. You can make this the ticket to return to lab. You can make it whatever it kind of applies to. And you just put that at the very bottom. And you can see on one, it was just a ticket to get back in to take a quiz. If they didn't complete the plan, this was a 5% reduction per the handbook policy, you know, and then they would be subject to further disciplinary action if it was to sit for the final. So the one student had like a 73% in one weighted area, and we allowed with that success plan for them to sit for their final with this ticket to test. So they had to see what they would improve on the following semester, but they also had to know they had to complete the whole semester with a 75 and also the final in order to pass. So yeah, you can kind of make that anything you want there at the bottom. But our students really, when they see that, we typically don't do many, more than one in a semester on a student, because it is a lot of work, and we'll typically refer them somewhere to ensure that they're participating in getting those resources that'll help them be successful, or at least an awareness. We still do lose some students because they just don't seem to put the time in, maybe to kind of correct what's going on. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Kelly?
I was muted, sorry. One of the benefits of frequent evaluation is it allows you as a faculty person or program director to show timely progress or lack of progress for individual students. It also allows for early intervention. If you're only assessing a student once a semester or twice a semester, it makes it very difficult to allow them to develop a plan to show improvement. So again, it really allows us the opportunity to intervene early and help them to succeed. So one of the things we do, Jackie, the next slide, is we do multiple methods of evaluation. So every week, as part of their clinical practicum experience, the student has to submit a weekly clinical documentation form. And it's very detailed. It gives their hours that they were there. And the big thing is here, the professional behaviors and the clinical performance. And this is very important, especially when I get a call from a clinical site that says, you know, this student's just not where they should be. They're not performing well. They're chronically late. They don't have their paperwork completed as they should. And then I pull out their form and I say, well, that's interesting because you've said that they're satisfactory in all of their professional behaviors and their clinical performance. And they'll say, well, the tech really didn't want to say anything. Well, I can't address the issue if you're not willing to address the issue. And it's pretty specific. They either meet the behaviors and the performance, or they need improvement. And these are forms that the clinical practicum instructor reviews every week. And if there's an issue, then they address it right then and there. I see that you're not bringing your paperwork. It's important that you print this out, take this with you every week, and we're going to talk about it again next Friday. So it allows us to intervene and ensure that they're meeting those competencies and behaviors, and then address it on a timely manner. The next page on this document also allows the tech at the top here to make comments about the student and what they're doing. And it also, the students are required to keep an activity log, the date that they were at rotation, what they did, and details about the comments. And it has to be detailed. And then the student is able to make a comment, and then the tech and the student both sign that. It's submitted as part of their weekly performance. And then a copy is also left at the clinical site. We also do periodic audits because we are a distance education program. You can imagine it is easy to try and falsify documents, but I will tell you our clinical practicum staff are like detectives. They look at signatures, they look at dates, activities, and they reach out to the clinical faculty on a regular basis. So we also have what we call a SAP, a Student Academic Progress Plan. In addition to the weekly monitoring of their clinical and work, we also do at the midpoint in the quarter, we're on a quarter system at week 6, the student, anybody that has a grade below 70% is required to complete a SAP. It's a lengthy process, but it really helps us and the students to target where they need to show success and where they're falling behind. And it forces them to look at their own personal situation and figure out, do I not understand it? For example, I had a student that started the quarter before we even got to the SAP, and she wanted a tutor. And we're only week 2 into the semester. She felt she needed help, she needed a tutor. Well, I went in and looked at her timeline, and she didn't need a tutor. She needed to access her course and attend the lectures as they occurred and not wait till Saturday at 11:30 at night to start doing your week's worth of assignments. So nice thing about online learning is you can track everything that the students do. So this requires a lot of work. The students have to complete, it's a 3-page form. They have to start by completing it. The course number, I give them their grades when they get this. The faculty gives them the form. They fill it out and what they think the solution is to their performance or their problems. And it has to be measurable. Like they have to be very specific about what their solution is. It can't be, I'll do better next semester, or I'll start to do my homework. It needs to be specific. Starting this week, I'll complete all of my assignments on time. I'll email my instructor at the end of the week and make sure there isn't anything that I'm missing, the date that is to be implemented. And then they also have to complete this, send it to their course faculty, and schedule a time to meet with that faculty. Once they've met with the faculty will fill out this section that they met with them, what their recommendations were. They sign it, the student signs it, and then they're required to meet with me. So it's a multi-step process. And then the next page shows things that they have to do. So one of the things is they have to sign it. They understand that they have unsatisfactory performance. It can affect not only their enrollment in the program, but their financial aid. And then they have to fill out the section to help me understand why they're doing poorly. Is it attendance? Is it relationship issues, family problems, difficulty balancing school and work? And the list goes on. And it's very telling how they fill this out. And sometimes I'll meet with a student and they'll say, you know, I didn't want to say anything. I'm just having a really difficult time at home. I've had to move with my 3 kids in with my mother. I'm going through a divorce. And so it's very telling, but things that you're not aware of. It's those under the surface things that are going on. I had a student last semester. She had 5 family members that developed COVID, and one of her grandparents passed away due to COVID. So it's like there's all these things going on, and it wasn't that she didn't want to do well. She just didn't have the time because she was taking care of other people. And we take that into account and make accommodations. But in order to make accommodations, they have to communicate that with the course faculty or with me. And then I have students that just plug along and do great. And I get a text that says, hey, by the way, I had my baby this weekend, and I'll be able to do my work next week. And it's like, I didn't even know you were pregnant and hadn't missed an assignment. So, and she'd planned the pregnancy. She was off during the break week. So, I mean, it varies from student to student, but it really helps us to address issues and help them be successful. One of the students met with the faculty and she didn't have internet at home. It's really difficult to be in an online program without internet. So she suggested that, you know, go to the local Panera Bread 2 nights a week and she can get free Wi-Fi. And the student did that for a few weeks until she got her internet back and was able to be successful. But again, those things have to be communicated with the faculty or with me as the program director. And then we look at these forms and make sure that they are showing forward progress. And we keep those forms as part of their records. So one of the standards, 5 fair practices, is on student records. And it says that satisfactory records must be maintained for student admission, advisement, counseling, and evaluation. Grades and credits for courses must be recorded on the student transcript and permanently maintained by the sponsor in a safe and accessible location. So this is another way to demonstrate that you're meeting those standards, standard 5 fair practices. Oh, sorry, go back, I was reading the comment. So one of the questions was, if a student has ongoing issues that will affect going to clinical sites, how much can you work with them? I think it's up to your independent or your individual college and what they'll allow. I can make accommodations for students as I see fit. Some colleges don't allow that. Some don't allow them to extend beyond the quarter. Sometimes I'll have a student that will have to take an LOA for a short period of time and then return, and we'll accommodate them that way. Or I have students that'll take an LOA and return in a later quarter. Some are required to meet twice a week with a tutor. One of the things since COVID is we have hired a tutor, which is one of our students that graduated from the program several years ago. And it seems less threatening to the students to be able to work one-on-one with that tutor than one of the faculty members or myself. So again, it's really up to your institution and what they're allowing and what you can do. Some students, I mean, you could spend an extra 6 months. It's not going to help them to do any better because they're one of those ones that maybe everybody else is putting in a lot more effort and time than they are. So it's difficult to determine that sometimes. But again, it's up to you and your individual institution. What the COA asks is that you document what you're doing and that you keep a record of that. And if it's something that's affecting your retention rates, you can say, this is what we've implemented, this is what we've done. Maybe it hasn't been successful, but for that student, no matter what you did, it couldn't have been successful. But you've documented it, you've kept that documentation on file.
And Kelly, this is Jackie. I just want to remind people too that if you have a student that leaves the program, like they're pregnant and they have to take a leave of absence, or they take a leave of absence for some other reason, or they fail a course and now they can't come back for a year until that same course cycles back up again, that's not an attrition student. If you have every reason to believe that they're coming back, then you want to have them on your enrollment and retention tab, have them show up in your in progress or stopped out. And so the reason or the way that that happens is you have the number of your students that were enrolled, and then you count the ones for attrition. But that person, maybe because they left, because they failed a professional course and it doesn't come back up for until next fall, or if you're on a quarterly system, it might come back up more quickly. But you really want to wait and say, okay, but I think they're coming back. They say they're coming back. Then you don't count them in your attrition, in your enrollment and retention tab. And so they will pop up then as a number in progress or stopped out. And then next year they come back and they finish the course. Then in your graduation, down on the bottom of that tab, they should have graduated in 2019, but now they're going to graduate in 2020. So you put them in as a 2020 graduate, but they still are not an attrition on your class that enrolled in, say, 2017. They just graduated a year late, and that's perfectly fine. And so we are going to be having the new ARMS launched. I just got the word that it's going to be launched in, the plan right now is October 19th. So I will be setting up orientation sessions for you for the new ARMS. We'll really spend some time on this because sometimes when I work with programs, that's exactly what I find out is that, oh, Mary left because she failed a course, and a year and a half later she comes back, and so they start her as a new student. Then they can never clear up that attrition, and she really shouldn't have been attrition as long as they think you're coming back, as long as you have a reasonable expectation that that student is coming back. So we're going to spend some time on that. And anyone who's having an issue with retention, I'll be happy to work with you with your ARMS to help you identify where you can fix that attrition problem or retention problem by just fixing your numbers.
And the other thing that's really important to remember is to go back and update your annual reports, because once you submit it, maybe you have some, like Jackie said, somebody that came back to the program. Those students, and I have a really difficult time with this, Jackie will tell you, they stay in their original cohort. Yes. So if Mary started in 2018, Mary is always going to be in 2018, even though she graduated in 2021. You have to go back and edit Mary in 2018. But it does. So you may be low. Maybe your retention rate is less than 70%. But then when you do your annual report next year, if she graduates, it may bump you up above 70%. So you're going to meet that threshold. So it's a continual change. Right. Same thing goes with graduate and employer surveys. Maybe you didn't have them all back when you put them in. If they come in later, you can go back and enter that data, and it will adjust what the percentage rates are.
And as long as it's before, say if your report is due November 1st, and if you're due November 1st, heads up, you're not going to have to do it for November 1st because we're only going to be orienting you to the new system on October 19th or thereabouts. And so, excuse me. So say a week after you submit it, normally we try that if you are due November 1st, we plan that we're going to review that at the January meeting. Now, if you've met everything and you're on our consent agenda, I can bump you into the December meeting. But for most purposes, let's just plan that if you are due to submit your report November 1st, you can anticipate that we're going to look at it in January. And so say the first week in December, you get more survey results or you get more ABRIT results, and you go in and you update your credentialing, you update your survey results. You can then create a new annual report and send it to me. Or the new system is going to be so cool, and I'm really looking forward to being able to show it to you again, that you can let me know that you've updated your report, and then that's the report that the board will look at, not the one that you had submitted 5 weeks ago. And I tell you that in the user's manual, that the last report we're going to look at is the one that comes in on or before, and I give you when that's going to happen. And so make sure that you do that, that you say, oh my God, I'm at 68%, but I know that I'm going to have somebody graduate. Maybe they're going to graduate in December. Then you can go in and change that, and then you'll meet that, that threshold. And so we really encourage you to almost think about the ARMS. And again, I'm going to highlight the new one, and Kelly can talk about it too because she's seen it. It is so easy to use, and it's such a nice user interface that you're actually going to want to go in and do it, because I think it's going to just be so interesting to be able to see your data change right in front of your eyes.
Any other questions? All right, so those are samples of the documents that we use, and they work well for us, but you may have things that work well for you. So what are you using in your individual programs? Does anybody want to share what they're using?
And just unmute yourself and speak, and if we start to get a number of people, then we'll ask you to raise your hand. But I think at this point you can just raise, yeah, oh, Melissa raised her hand. Okay, perfect. Why don't you raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Okay, so what I did is I do something very similar, but I call it a memo of understanding, that they understand and they have to sign it that they did the same things. I also started the semester, and it's going great, that they, for every assignment they do, which is weekly, including their quizzes, they have to talk about their strengths, the challenge they had for it, and a plan for improvement for every single assignment. And that's really making a big difference for me to be able to see where they're struggling with and what I need to fix on each assignment as well. So that's really helpful for me.
That's great. And our weekly documentation actually changes in the fourth quarter. And one of the things that changes in the fourth quarter, they have to comment on what they did well this week. And then they have to also put in there a reflection on what they need to improve on and what they're going to do next week to improve that. So if they say, I want to improve my pattern recognition skills, that's not enough. They have to say, I want to improve my pattern recognition skills. I'm going to schedule 2 review sessions with my senior tech and review 2 EEG. So they have to be very specific and measurable things that they have to be able to accomplish.
I have a question for you then. We do that with clinical strengths and weaknesses and focuses, but how are you doing that with assignments? Are you right now teaching online, or are you face-to-face?
I'm both. So they have all the didactic portion lectures online. So in the Dropbox, they have to submit all their assignments electronically. And I did it actually even when we were face-to-face, they still have to submit assignments online, that they have to, or they automatically lose 50% of their grade if they don't do a self-reflection. And again, same for Kelly, even all the didactic assignments, everything they turn in, they have to have a plan for improvement. And if I don't see the plan for improvement improve from week to week, then they'll lose points. And then it's all documented on there because they created it. And then for lab portions, so for all their things for lab, they submitted their weekly strengths online via Dropbox. So even though they're face-to-face, they submit it electronically. So it's documented in with that course. So I don't have to keep track of it.
Yeah, and my students aren't allowed to repeat either. So they can't say week after week, I want to improve my pattern recognition skill, unless they're specific. I need to improve my neonatal EEG pattern recognition, or I need to improve adults or ICU. Like, they have to be very specific. They cannot repeat from week to week.
And the thing that helped me the most, I think, was the challenges. So I could see what challenges each student had and how they plan. And if their plan for improvement didn't address their challenge, then it was a lot of work. I'm not gonna lie, it's a lot, but it really gave me a feel for it. Like, okay, this is your challenge. Your plan improvement has nothing to do with your challenge that you face for this week. So what are you going to do? And now that we're in week 5, they're really getting the groove of it, and it's really helping me. And if I see patterns and challenges, then I could like, oh, maybe it was my assignment, or maybe I need to address this as a class. So it's kind of giving me a checks and balances as well.
That's great. Anything that anybody else is doing? And then the other piece that I just want to go back to is, how do you use the documentation? And again, for the COA, it goes back to that record keeping and documentation. So if you're having issues with retention, or if you're having different issues with different standards, you're able to document that and show that you're implementing a plan. Because one of the things we want to know is, oh, not that we're going to ding you because you fell below the threshold, is that, one, you recognize you're below the threshold, and two, that you're looking at that and developing a plan to try and improve so that you go above threshold. And then the reflection piece for us is that we have to go back, and maybe we've developed a plan, or you've had a plan for 3 years and it hasn't worked. At what point do you reevaluate that and develop a new plan? And it's not just copying and pasting it onto the form. It's saying, okay, we've looked at this, it's not working, our numbers aren't going up, what can we do? And sometimes you can't do anything. I have a feeling with COVID, there's a lot that is way out of our control. But I mean, you have to look at the data, make a plan, and try and work with it. Have programs been having problems with retention due to COVID?
Hi, this is Vicki Sexton. So I just had a student, I guess it's in 3 weeks, and she decided that she has some underlying health issues. She just didn't want to take the chance of going when we do start rotations with them, which we haven't yet. But she said she felt even uncomfortable around her own fellow students, let alone going into a hospital. So she decided she was going to drop out. And she said, maybe once the COVID's over. And I said, well, it's only going to be the next pandemic will come along, so that might be something you might want to look into before you reapply for next year.
And so what you have to do is document that. I just had a 3rd quarter student that went back to clinicals and said, the rates are too high. My family's not comfortable with me being here. I'm withdrawing. Actually took an LOA and plans on coming back in the spring. But, it's going to be a different issue in the spring. So, yeah, those are things that are pretty much out of our control. They're one of those non-academic issues. And I don't know what your programs are dealing with, but most of the students that are leaving are not academic issues. They're really life issues.
And this is Jackie. Just to remind you that the COA policy is that you save those documents for 3 years. The teams will look at, and they want to validate your documentation. So they want to validate what you've submitted in your annual report. And so having those documents available will be very helpful when the site team comes in, whether it's virtually or whether it is face-to-face, to be able to say, yes, these are the things we did to improve retention, or these are the survey results. So we want to see that raw data. We don't want you to send us that raw data. And for those of you who do that, You're doing a lot of work that you don't need to do, because I will tell you that I don't even download them, because the committee is not going to look at your raw data. We want to see your data in the ARMS. It'll be when the site team goes that they will look at your supporting documents. So hanging on to them. We don't ask you to keep them for longer than 3 years. We've agreed that site teams will not ask you to go back 5 years ago and pull documents. So within the past 3 years. So just hang on to them and then shred them, or however you destroy them at your college. If you're keeping them online in an online system, then, you know, if your college rolls it, or if they dump data at a certain point, they just want to make sure that you've got your 3 years and you download it.
And the reason we do 3 years is because it's a 3-year cycle. We're looking at your 3-year statistics. So we don't care not that we don't care, we don't need to look at what was 6 years ago.
Right.
And the reason you need to keep them on file is because if there are any issues, or you have a focus site visit, that you're able to present that data to the review committee. I have a couple comments here, so I just want to see if we can go through them about COVID. One of the program directors said they had a problem with lack of clinical sites taking students, so they needed to decrease enrollment. And that's a plan. I mean, you've had an issue, so it's not affecting your retention, but it's affected your enrollment because now you're taking less students due to not having as many clinical sites. So that's great, and you just need to document that. Somebody else had 10 students, lost 1 for fear of COVID, 1 actually with COVID, and on an LOA, and 1 failed. Hope to get the 2 LOAs back. And see, that's a good thing to track. Jackie has a great spreadsheet that I've started using. When all your students start, you have their names, and then you have first semester. And then if they leave, you block them out, that they've left and the reason why. Then they move on to the second semester. So that student stays on your spreadsheet until they've completed the program. And it's a great way to go back and look at it, especially when you're trying to do your statistical data.
Yeah, I used to use that when I was a program director, because my school, we were a private not-for-profit school in Boston, and we took 2 classes a year, but then they all joined in September. So we had 1 class that began in September and went September to May, and then the second class came in the fall, that was September. So we started a class in January, which made it nice for students who failed a professional course in the first semester, because they could just jump right back in January. That January cohort had the same graduation date as the traditional 2-year cycle. And so I would never remember when I'm sitting there trying to remember, oh, okay, why did they leave and when did they leave? Because all of a sudden I had 2 jumped in together with the same graduation date. And you're always reporting on 2 separate cohorts. You're reporting on your enrollment cohort and again, I think this is going to be so much clearer for you in the ARMS, because all of the enrollment and retention is on one tab now. You don't have to bounce around between tabs. The other thing is we've really cleaned it up. So you will only see the classes, I think, for 6 years. And if you're clean, if you've got all the people have either graduated or you've accounted for them, then you don't even have to look at that anymore. So it's going to make it so much easier for you to use the ARMS. But just to kind of back up again, is what you want to make sure is that you can report on that enrollment cohort, because then I had 2 different enrollment cohorts and I had 1 graduation cohort, because they go in there. And so you always want to remember that you're working with 2 cohorts that may or may not be the same. Your enrollment cohort that you use for your enrollment and retention, and then your graduation cohort that you use for your outcomes. And so I think that document that we had developed, I probably used it 20 years ago when I was 25 years ago when I was program director. It helped me keep it straight, because I couldn't keep it straight. So how is your documentation working for you? Does it give you everything you need to help the students?
Oh, you mean as far as the
Right. So, I mean, do you feel like if you're doing some of the forms, I think Kelly and Diane have really good forms, but if you have a form that you look at it and you say, well, this is just really busy work for me, then you would want to evaluate that form and change it maybe. Sometimes it's not always easy to just take a form from one institution and plop it down in yours, because you need to think about it in the context of your specific environment. And so I always encourage student or faculty to look at samples of forms that are working in other schools and just to say, is that going to work for me in my environment? Is that going to work for me? Or do I need to do something a little bit different?
And I think that's a good point, because there's nothing worse to a program director than doing busy work. If it's not adding value to your program or value in helping you make decisions, then why are you doing it?
Right.
The same thing with accreditation. We don't ask you to submit things that we're not going to look at. Why? One of the reasons things that changed is contracts. It's an internal process. You know that they have to be done. You're verifying that you have contracts. Why do you want to send that to this committee and have them read through every single contract? And are they going to? Why should you submit things that aren't being looked at? So, I mean, to me, it's really important that what we're doing is relevant and useful.
So we have a question, should we share our forms here? I think what I'm going to do is set up a Dropbox for all the program directors so that if you want to share something, you can. And then I think that's also where we'll post this rather than putting it on our website. I think we'll put it, I'll save it up to YouTube, and then we can put it in the Dropbox, and that way you can come in and get it and look at it when you want to without having to go to the website.
I think that's a good idea. And we have a couple questions. I'm just trying to go through them. So Vicki asked, wait a minute, I have to scroll back up. What about loss of doing patients at clinical sites? How do you assess if they can still measure? I think it's an individual program. You have to ensure that the student is competent. If you have evaluation tools in place that they have to do, then they have to pass it just like they did before COVID. And you said a student that withdrew and can't do clinical, well, that's your policy. But if they can't do clinicals, then how can they complete the program? They'll have to take an LOA and return. I mean, I don't know what your college's policy is, but if you can't take the course, clinical or academic, even if you're online, then you can't, then you're not meeting the program requirements.
And Vicki, one of the things we did when clinical kind of shut down in March for us, that was at midterm. So we were 8 weeks into our 16-week semester, and it was the first clinical semester and the last clinical semester. So the last clinical semester students, they had already kind of met their competencies. We had all of their documentation, and they had over 150 EEG cases each. So we felt confident we could graduate them. The first year students who were only 8 weeks in and had very little patient interaction, we were worried if we could complete the semester. But we made some kind of bug out kits, we called them, and bought some shoe boxes. We sent each student, they pulled through the Circle Drive one day at the school, and they picked up their kit, which had their electrodes. It had all kinds of supplies in it for them, since they have the mannequin head they purchase. We completed that semester online, even the clinical, just by assignments, and then their final is that they have to do the whole patient, get the history and all of that. And so we split the students up between the faculty and myself, and we did a Zoom clinical final. So they took a history from us. At the same time, then they were measuring and marking their patient, but they were speaking to us as the patient. And so it was kind of done all online. And then we had them kind of measuring and doing the inter-electrode distances with us on Zoom. So
Yeah.
that was one way we kind of finished that out.
We actually didn't have any problems except with seated or online, because we did the same thing, gave them stuff to take home.
Yeah.
Well, the seated ones. But the online students, I just have one who, like, right now is like hitting a financial crisis, and she was trying to see if she could do clinicals online. I said, no, you have to go to a clinical site, and you haven't done a patient since March, so I can't let you go a whole semester and then not go to clinical sites till January, because that's 9 months where you haven't touched a patient. So then part of me, like, for listening to you guys, is like, because the college, like, I don't know if they've kind of made up their mind or not, kind of like can she leave the program and then come back, say, next fall, then just start where, these classes now. So then she's close enough where she probably could drive in to see us, and we could have her somebody just to make sure, like, that she still has skills, because it's not always like riding a bike, so that was my concern. Like, how do you guys do that? You let somebody take an LOA, and then when they come back, you know what I mean? Like, they go to, say, their new site. Are they starting out almost as if like they're a first year student?
No. So what I did was, we had first and third quarter students when COVID started. So everybody went online, then they came back. Then I had the group that graduated, but they'd already done over 150 EEGs by the time they graduated, and we were able to document competency. Those students that were first quarter going into second quarter, now into third, if they did not have a clinical site, they could not return. They had to take a mandatory LOA, and then they can return once their clinical site's open. Because, I mean, some in Pennsylvania, New York, California, those sites have not opened yet, and I don't see them opening anytime soon. Yeah, especially in New York and California.
Well, but we're okay with that. Like, we only had half our sites come back, and they let our second year students like kind of double up, because we didn't have a first year students going there yet. So they're, you know what I mean? So, but it's this one person that I'm saying, like, if you say somebody, they were halfway through your school and then they went out on maternity, when they come back that next fall or the next class to start, you know what I mean?
They have to come back where they left off.
Right.
So they they couldn't come back until third quarter.
No, I'm not saying that. Like, I would have her come back as a, starting the, so right now they're in NDT 200, 201. So that's where she would start. Next fall, she'd come back.
And start those classes, yes.
I don't care about the classes. Like, that's fine. Like, academically, she's great. That's not gonna be. I'm saying when then she goes to rotation, won't she be almost like a first year student, like, as far as like measuring and trying to hook up a patient, because she hasn't done it in so long?
Right.
I mean, it's going to be like a year and so many months.
This is Jackie. What our college used to do in our Division of Allied Health and our health professions, we had a division-wide policy that when you came back from an LOA, you had to demonstrate that you had retained your clinical skills. And so we would have them come into the lab. And so if you're doing it online, I think you'd have to work with your hospital and get them ability to do that. Right. But they have to come in, and we would take the final competency documentations from the semester they left, and they had to be able to document that they had retained those skills. And if they didn't, we would give them a lab prescription that was kind of like Diane's ticket to test, but we'd write down exactly what they had to do, and then they had to go to the open lab where we would staff it with faculty from all the different programs in the labs, and they would have to go see the lab instructor and hand her the document and say, this is what I have to work on. And then we would give them a timeline, and we would make them do that probably, if they were coming back in September, we'd probably have them come in and do that assessment in July. So that would give them at least a good month to come in to the lab and be able to get those skills back up to where they left, so that when they went back to clinical, if they were in semester 3, they were expected to come in with the same skills as every other semester student in semester 3.
Okay.
Because we had that process
That
in
sounds
place.
great.
And
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we did it for
Yeah,
the
I
same
like
reason.
that.
We had students that some programs were saying, well, if you're going to come back, you have to come back and repeat the whole first year. Well, financial aid won't pay for that. If you get a C or better, financial aid won't pay for that.
Correct.
So somebody complained, it was right after I started working there, somebody filed a complaint with the president of the college, and he was like, what do you mean you have faculty making people take courses over when they got an A in them? And he was like, you got to come up with a better plan than that, Jack. So we met with all the program directors, and we hammered it out, and we figured out, okay, this will make everybody feel okay that they have to do that.
So what did the lab slip, it just included a checklist of what they had to be competent in?
Mm-hmm. It would say, you know, like depending on what the program was, and so every program took the prescription form, and then they modified it for their own use. And so if they were coming back and say they left in semester 2 and they were coming back in semester 3, then they would have the skills from semester 2, and if they demonstrated them satisfactorily, then they got checked off. And if they didn't, then they would have a comment on, you know, they couldn't suction, for example, in respiratory. They couldn't suction without contaminating the sterile field, or, and that's showing my age because now you don't even break the circuit anymore. Yeah, exactly what they couldn't do. You would write that down very specifically so that the lab person, and this was, again, there was a financial impact because most of our programs didn't run in the summer, so we didn't have faculty there. So we were having to hire them on an overload to come in. And we wanted to make sure that if we're hiring someone to come in and have the lab open for you to come back, then we wanted to be very clear what it was, and then you had to make sure you did that, because if you didn't, you couldn't come back. And we also use those open lab hours during the summer frequently for students who were marginal in the previous semester. So they managed to get checked off, but they may have had 2 or 3 skills that they didn't quite make the competency level on. And so they would have to come in during the summer and work on that. And we used to say to them that, you know, students would say sometimes to us like, well, I did this the same exact way as I did it in the first semester. Well, like, and competency is a progressing skill. What's competent in the first semester will not be competent in the second semester. And so we, you know, had that increasing competency going up. So sometimes you'd have a student that was almost there, but not quite. And rather than fail them, you give them a lab prescription, an incomplete in the course, and then a lab prescription. And then they would come in, and then by the end of the summer, they would have to document, and that grade then could be changed to an F or whatever grade they earned, a D or an F to fail, or they got changed to whatever grade they now have because they completed everything satisfactorily.
Oh, that's great. And Melissa Strewing said she has a form for that. She's willing to share. So
perfect. I'll set that Dropbox up later on today evening, and send you all you know, an invitation to join a shared Dropbox. It'll be a program director's Dropbox.
Vicki, one of the things that we've used too is it's based on per student, and we do another one of those communication records that everybody signs. So if they say they drop out after the first semester, they want to come back the following, ours is a whole year. So they just can't pick up where they left off. So we'll come to an agreement that they have to come in 2 weeks, you know, of the lab, you know, to make sure they have their skills. And for our students to return, they have to repass every final from every course that's already been taken. So that ensures then that they've studied along the way, and they can pick up where they left off. So they do have to pass every final also.
do you have a time limit to return? Like, do they have to return within a year?
Ours was 2 years.
For our students, they do.
Yeah, ours was 2 years. And if they didn't come back within 2 years, then they had to start over again.
Right.
We just didn't feel like that there was any way you could keep those skills up. You'd have to be relearning them if you were not working in the area. And so we said, if you don't come back next year, well, there's still a reason maybe you, well, and also sometimes you couldn't come back because there wasn't space. So, because all the readmissions were space available.
Because she's online, there's definitely enough space, but, and she's a straight A student, so.
And do you charge for the lab prescription?
We did not. And we didn't because when we first started it, we had a little grant from someone. I wrote a little grant application to a philanthropic agency in town, and we got money from the grant. So we didn't charge the students because we felt like it was meeting our goal of graduating, enough people to provide workforce for our primary service area. And so when we didn't have the grant and we weren't eligible to reapply for it, I just went to the VP and said, how can we get this money into our budget? And he put it in at the division office so that it wasn't like a program had money and then didn't need to use it. I mean, sometimes we'd have a program that said, I don't have anybody who's coming back next year. I don't need any anybody in the lab for the summer. And then you'd have another program who came and said, I'm going to need 30 hours in the summer. And it wasn't unlimited either. We would say to students, you have to do this, but you can't take like 30 hours to do it, And so what was a reasonable expectation? And the faculty would do the same kind of evaluation as they would have done during the lab course or the clinical. And that if you came in and you worked on it a little bit and then they said, okay, we're ready for you to test, or the student said, I'm ready to test, and they didn't pass it then, at that point, then they got the grade they earned and they didn't get to keep trying over and over and over again. So people took it seriously and we were able to manage it. We were able to manage the money well enough that I had that money up until the time I left. I don't know whether, when I retired, I don't know if they still have it or if they still do it that way, but it worked well for us. And during the year, we staffed the lab with open lab time as using faculty workload under our union contract.
I think the lab prescription is a great idea because like I said, I have third quarter students that couldn't start because their labs haven't opened back up, but it's a great way to make sure they can just jump right back in.
If I can get my old computer booted up, I'll probably be able to find it on that one. I know it's not on this one, but I can, we're doing a project in our house trying to get rid of all the computers that are sitting idle. And so I have my grandson pulling everything off hard drives. So I'll ask him to see if he can find it for me.
Right, great. Anybody else have any questions? We have a couple questions that we're going to answer. Somebody submitted a question. I think Wendy or Heidi submitted a question. So the question was, when students are concerned that they cannot find a job near their hometown and that they'll have to move away, how do we handle those kind of scenarios? Seems to have students in the area that do not want to leave. So I know what I do. What do some of the rest of you do as far as local jobs for students? Do you inform them at the start of the program? How do you handle that?
For our program, we do information sessions. And during that time, I am very honest with them and I tell them that because we have a seated and we have a few online schools in the Philadelphia area, that the area sometimes gets saturated. I said, but if you would just move an hour outside of this area, there are plethora of jobs out there that need to be filled. And then I remind them as we're through the whole 2 years of going through the program.
Okay. Diane said it's the same there, that they document that in her information conference, and it's mandatory before they apply that they have that understanding. Heidi, do you want to elaborate on that at all, or are there not any jobs in your area? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, they're starting to fill very quickly. When students, like on day one and throughout the entire program, they do know that all jobs in Wisconsin are starting to fill quickly. And they will have to move to the larger areas, Madison, Milwaukee, larger, cities, which can be 2-3 hours away. But now we're getting to the point where even those big cities are starting to fill, so they may have to move out of state. So
do you think it's due to COVID?
Not due to COVID. I think that because there hasn't been a school in the state of Wisconsin for, I think, 14 or 15 years, there hasn't been one open, that sites are just, they're not really expecting graduates. So, I've been putting the word out that, we have students, and if you're looking for opportunities to grow your hospital or your clinic, we have opportunities to provide you with staff, but it's just not really happening.
Yeah, that's a shame. My students are all over, so I'm not finding that as an issue. But
it's just, I'm sorry, are students just, our hospitals rather, since you've not had schools, are they just of the mindset that they're going to hire somebody and train them themselves, or?
Yes, there's been a lot of on-the-job training, and there's just a lot of there's a lot of travel techs and a lot of the on-the-job training. So, contracted work, the 13-week, those types of things. So.
Well, those are way more expensive than hiring your graduates. So the department managers, and I don't know whether you would do this through your advisory committee or what, but get the word out that you're going to have graduates, and they don't need to keep, because they're paying probably at least double or double and a half for those travel techs as they would pay a graduate who's coming into work, because of the housing costs that get imposed on that and the administrative cost. So, I mean, it would be really their financial benefit to hire your graduates rather than continuing to rely on travel techs.
I'm trying, I really am. I'm getting the word out slowly, but
hey, pull them into your advisory board.
Great idea.
Yeah, I should.
This is Tabitha. Heidi, I know a lot of your students I've actually recruited. But a lot of them, when I hear them interview and stuff with us, so I system help. So I have 16 hospitals in Wisconsin and 7 hospitals in Illinois. And when we're recruiting and interviewing your students individually, the biggest thing we hear is they don't want to leave Neenah. And for everyone on this board, Neenah is like a town of 10,000 people. So
exactly.
It's hard to say that we won't take them from that town and put them to another hospital that's larger. So your school has a lot of small town feels that don't really want to get away from that, but something I can definitely partner with you on.
Great.
Yeah, I try to get my baby chickens out of the nest, but they do not want to leave the city.
Then you need to start recruiting in those outside areas.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
So then we got, when should a plan be developed regarding retention thresholds? CAHEP looks at 3-year retention rate. Should I be concerned if my current numbers don't meet the threshold? Kelly and Diane, you want to address that?
You should develop a plan immediately. Don't wait for 3 years, because if you're doing things and you're documenting it and you're talking about it in your advisory committee, then you're already doing what we would ask you to do. So document your plan, the steps that you're taking, and do it immediately. I mean, if you go from a 90% retention rate down to a 75% retention rate, that's a significant difference. So, I mean, you should be documenting it as you go along and not wait till you hit that 3 years.
And that's actually
right. I agree.
Oh, go ahead, Diane.
Go ahead. Oh, no, I agree. And that's the same thing we do since we have 2 classes going at the same time. We look at both classes in the advisory meeting annually as far as, what's going on with both classes. So we're kind of looking at the past data and potentially the future data. How many did we accept if it was a small number? Kind of enrollments are down a little bit. So then that's could affect our retention if we lose. the same number of students, it's a higher percentage. So we just kind of look at it, document it, so then the documentation is kind of already there, and we're building a plan as we go along. We may not ever go below the threshold, and that's great. We still have a plan in place for still constantly improving it. But if we do go below, we have the data from year to year in our advisory committee to kind of already address it.
And one of the things that you'll notice too, if you have, if you're meeting the threshold, and obviously we're perfectly fine if you're meeting the threshold and it's year after year and you're meeting it, and you get the letter that says that you met all, you know, we congratulate you, you met all of your outcomes thresholds. On the other hand, if we see that you went from, you know, 80% for your 3-year average, and now this year, the 2019, you went to 50%, we'd be, okay, well, we're going to look at that another year. Next year, you still may meet the threshold, but if you're below 70%, arithmetically, you're not going to meet it the year after. So generally, at 2 years, we will call that to your attention, as if you haven't noticed already. But in your letter back from us, we would say you met the threshold. However, COA noticed that you had 2 years of declining retention rates and encourages you to begin to explore factors that may be contributing to that. So you don't get a citation, but you get a, hey, we're looking at this, and you should be too. Especially if you haven't put something in your report, because if you meet the thresholds, you're not required to do an analysis and action plan. But if you've got a 2-year declining rate, you probably ought to be doing that, because if you don't do something next year, you're not going to meet the threshold. That was the last question that came in from the group before. So for now, we have time to just take questions about anything that may have been presented today, how we can, you know, what can we do to help you? So we'll open the floor. And again, I would encourage you probably to raise your hand. Bajit?
I have a question. I have one student who just recently acquired a job with a neurologist office, and there's no other tech working there, but she's being monitored by the neurologist. And as of now, we have not started our clinicals. So I wanted to know if that time that she spends at the neurologist's office can be applied towards clinical hours.
Well, I have an opinion.
I'm going to open the standards, because there's actually a standard about that.
You have to have a policy in place, and then you have to follow your policy. If your policy allows them to do that, as long as they're not being substituted for employment, and they have to be able to meet their educational goals and have oversight if they're going to count that as clinical experience.
So then I think what I was told was that you have to have a registered technologist there overseeing everything.
Yes, if they're counting that as their clinical time.
Yes. So this would not apply then as clinical time, I'm assuming, even though there's a neurologist overseeing her.
I've found, because early on we allowed a neurologist to provide oversight, and it doesn't work because they don't do the head measurements, the head check. Like, it's not that they're not qualified as a neurologist, because many neurologists have had lots of training in EEG. It's just that they can't. They don't do the head measurements. It doesn't work, and it's really up to your policy.
Okay, thank you. I'm new to this, so I just wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing.
Yeah, that is actually standard 5C. All activities required in the program must be educational, and students must not be substituted for staff. So you would want to make sure that at that point they're working as staff. So and that there's no REGT in the facility. So probably not want to count those as.
Yeah, I thought so. I just needed to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the thing is, as your program grows, you're going to have a policy for it, because it's going to come up again and again.
Yes. Thank you.
Rhonda, you asked about the forms. Jackie's going to create a Dropbox and she'll send you an invitation to the Dropbox so you'll be able to access the forms. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for attending. We appreciate
we have
you.
two people who've raised their hands, Rebecca.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Rebecca.
Yeah, so I'm at a school that has some very large programs, and obviously I'm very tiny at the moment. I started with 6 students in the middle of a pandemic, and I in theory have 5, but I think I really have 4. Going forward for my next year, they would like to see me get larger. And I have been so far saying that I wouldn't want to be anything bigger than 12, because I think the facility that I have, how much room I have, I don't think I can do more than that. Plus, I worry about saturating my market if I have 20 students each year coming out into the thing. If I can't get them out of the area, because everybody likes to stay close to home. What do you think is a good number of students for a program? And if your number that you have in your head is lower than what your school thinks that you should have, what arguments do you use to defend that statement?
So your number one limitation is the number of clinical sites in your area. You can't take more students than you can place at a clinical site.
Yeah, and that's what I was using as my 12. I figured I could, with what I have, which I do have a lot of clinical sites in my area. I'm pretty lucky for that, but I still think 12, maybe 15 is the max I could take. And my provost has grand dreams of 20 to 30, and I'm like,
well, and you have to remember, because your students will overlap in clinical, correct?
Yes.
So you can't take 20 in one class when you already have 20, because then you're still not going to have enough clinical sites.
Right.
And the other thing, and I'll put my dean's hat on here, is that looking at your lab space, if you've got lab space that can hold 12 students, then in order to have larger than 12 students, or more than 12 students, you're going to need to show that you can schedule multiple lab sections, which is going to bring in having the need to hire adjuncts. So I would look at it that way, but I would also bring your advisory committee in on that and show that you're discussing it at your advisory committee in the context of what are the anticipated employee needs, so that you're not oversaturating the market, and get your advisory committee to support you. Now, your dean may say, you know what, if you can take 24 students, we'll hire you an adjunct. And so, be prepared for that. But you need to look at it in more, what space do you have? What equipment do you have? How many students could you reasonably accommodate with what you have? And what's it going to cost if you have to bring in additional faculty, if you have to schedule multiple sections, if you have to look for larger space at the institution.
Okay. And Jordan commented on that too, Rebecca. I think she's in North Carolina. They limit theirs to 12 for that exact reason. They tell the dean and the VP, the more students equal more faculty, more course sections, which equals less than one-on-one attention.
Right. Okay, that helps.
Melissa raised her hand.
Sorry, I was just going to comment, Rebecca. The other thing I also included for my dean, because we're a smaller program, is the amount of assessment time per student. Marking and measuring and checking all their checkoffs is very time consuming for instruction and doing all that. So I also included each competency in there as well for their time limit to check them and saying, look, I can't unless you want to hire more staff. And that also helped me.
Okay, that sounds good.
And student reviews, like, hey, smaller student lab, you can address it, you can fix those competencies, those issues, especially in the intro class for marking and measuring. It's very time consuming.
Yeah, it's working out for me right now being so small because I can actually go on campus and a lot of other programs can't because I have 5 students showing up, right? So right now it's working for me being so small, but I know once the pandemic is passed, I'm going to start feeling the pressure to have more students. So I just want to have my game plan ready.
I think there was a question about the advisory committee. There was one on, do you have recommendations on how to build a great advisory committee?
I'm trying to think.
We actually have a great article that was written when we were doing a newsletter by Stephanie Jordan, who was the chair of, she was actually on the board at the time, but she was also the chair of an advisory committee at the community college near her hospital. And so I can email that out to everyone to take a look at.
You know, who is anybody from Cuyahoga on the call?
I don't think so.
I would recommend that you contact the program director at Cuyahoga or their clinical coordinator, Yitka, who's also one of our board members. They have one of the most interactive advisory committees that I've ever seen. So maybe they'll be able to give you some feedback on how they did that. But they have a very large advisory committee. They all show up to every meeting and they're all very active on their advisory committee.
Right. Would that be a topic of interest that we might want to do a session on about how we could recruit and get some of the programs that have really active, engaged advisory committees to share strategies and maybe get some of the advisory committee members to talk about it as well? We could think about that, how to structure it, but would that be helpful to you guys?
They're saying yes.
Okay.
The other thing we did that recruited them, I personally recruited a ton of mine. And I have 4 physicians on my advisory board, but we started with one of my adjuncts, Veronica, doing a preceptor education program that was open to all preceptors and had our physicians speak at it too and offer free ASAT CEUs for it. And that really helped as well. It was independent from the advisory board, but we kind of bribed them a little bit. And that really got more buy-in for our advisory board, and then more people were willing to participate on. It's a lot of work, but we did 2 weekends. We were doing it again, and we opened it up to all our clinical preceptors, our graduates, and we get physicians, techs, we do it, and we give them, they can attend for free and get like 8 free ASAT CEUs. It's a lot of work, but it really helped us a lot to get more buy-in.
And do you feed them?
We feed them.
Yeah,
yes.
That's another thing that gets them there is you feed them.
Feed them good too. Don't feed them.
And remember that your advisory committee, you can have people call in or you can do a Zoom. They just have to, it can be online using electronically, as long as you have synchronous sessions. So you can't just send an email out and get feedback. That doesn't count. But letting people who say, oh my God, I can't get there, call in, or if you want to set it up as a Zoom, whatever you want to do, just to have people be able to be engaged at the same time, then that counts as an advisory committee meeting.
The other thing I started was when the students do feedback on their clinical sites, whoever said that they had a great clinical preceptor, I would call them like, hey, thank you for being such a great preceptor. The students loved you. Is there any way, I would love more feedback from you. Could you please be on our advisory board? So I would start it out with a positive, like, hey, they really liked you, you had such good feedback, and then try to get them in.
Well, I put advisory committee down as a topic. So I think we're going to try and do 2 of these a year with cooperating with Linda and Asset. So we could do more if there's more demand, but right now I think we're starting out with 2. As we said, the next one will be in November. And then I was at a session, an e-meeting with ASPA, which is the accrediting agency that accredits CAHEP. And so I went to their annual meeting last week, and they had a session having program faculty and students talking about what we learned from COVID and then what we're keeping. That is a really good idea. And they had it from the faculty perspective and from the students. It was just a really good presentation. So we're thinking we might do that after the first of the year for our third session. And that's really one of the reasons we're asking you to submit your updated substantive change reports. Not that we're looking to say, oh my God, we can't believe they did that, but we're looking to say, wow, what a great idea. And this is something that we would encourage you to share with all the other programs. Tabitha?
Somebody asked a question, Jackie, about advisory committee. With COVID, everything went online. So they're not going to have their October meeting. What can they do about that?
You're only required to have one a year. So if you had one in the spring, then you're perfectly fine. If you didn't have one in the spring, you can either do a virtual meeting or just say you didn't do one this year. And I'm sure that the committee, because of COVID and I've talked to some of my other colleagues who are still in education, and particularly if they ran a respiratory program, and they're like, we couldn't even begin to ask our advisory committee members to meet. And so I think the committee would take that into account.
And then somebody had another suggestion for a meeting about recruiting clinical sites.
Oh, great.
My second full-time job. And Tabitha has a question.
Yes. Tabitha?
I just had a general question. I know there's other bachelor programs on here besides myself. Do most of the bachelor programs have your NDT courses as 100s and 200s, or do you guys have them as 3 and 400s?
Hi, this is Barbara from New Orleans. Ours are marked 300. Our associate's degree program is a 3-year program. Our bachelor's is a 4-year program. So they usually do 2 years of general education and science courses before they start the NDT courses. So they start the NDT courses at the 300 level for both the associate's and the bachelor's degree.
And Maggie's putting in 300 and 400 courses. Because hers is a bachelor's degree program as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
This is Maggie. Can I ask a question? Our students, by policy from the university, are not allowed to test anyone who's positively tested for COVID. That's not to say that they wouldn't test someone that would later test positive, but that limits them. And since a lot of people who might go to the hospital for more routine things or evaluations or have their yearly EEG, whatever, are postponing that because they don't want to go to the hospital because of COVID. They're not getting a large number like I was sort of hoping that they would. And I just wondered if anybody else had that issue. Luckily, we've taken in a clinic, and as a clinical site, and the clinic is still having volume of EEGs, but the usual routine EEGs are not in large numbers like they used to be, at least for the clinical side. So.
Hi, this is Barbara again from New Orleans. We've had the same issue because our clinical sites closed down their outpatient EEGs for about 4 months. So it was affecting the number of studies that our students could do. Those outpatient clinics are just reopening. Our university doesn't prescribe that our students can't do EEGs on COVID positive patients, but all of our clinical sites have that limitation. So both of those are issues for us.
I have a quick question. For program directors, are you required to purchase PPE for your students, or are they getting it through the hospitals?
Our hospital is providing it for our program specifically. However, for our nursing program, there's so many students that their department is required to do it. But since we only have one or two, all our hospitals that are taking students, we only have one that's not. They're doing it for us. So we're really lucky.
You are.
However, for our lab class, since we have face-to-face, I did purchase all face shields and things for our students for lab courses.
Okay. Yeah, it seems a mixed bag. Some of the schools are purchasing, other the colleges, other the clinical sites are providing. Thank you. All right, no other questions, anybody? Well, thank you. Linda Kelly's going to be doing our next session, which, do we have a date for that, Linda?
Yes, it's Jackie, but we do have a date.
We do, but I don't know if I know it. It's something in November. I mean, I have it on a calendar somewhere.
I'm looking for it. Hang on a minute. It's November 17th, 3 to 5.
That sounds right.
And what's it going to be on?
Quality Matters, which is an organization that sort of vets. It's like the co-ANDT of online learning.
Awesome.
So you can go through kind of a rubric, and I'll go over some things that you can just implement on your own. It's easier if your college kind of participates, but if there's just some improvements you want to make, you can do it that way too.
Oh my gosh, the group's very excited about Quality Matters.
Oh, good. We'll see if I can do it justice. So I had a Quality Matters certified NDT course when I was at Delaware County Community College. So I was the only person in the allied health discipline, I think, willing to give it a shot. So
yeah, Melissa just said she's certified, and Rhonda said she's in a course right now. So everybody's excited about the Quality Matters.
Good.
All right, so that'll be November 17th, 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern time.
Right.
So are they going to register through you, Jackie?
I think so. Linda, do you want me to just do another Survey Monkey registration? Is that just as well for you?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
And it's important that you register, because then you can get the asset CEUs for that.
Yes, that's why we asked your asset ID when you logged in today, because afterwards we'll export the Excel spreadsheet, and then it's easier for us to just upload it that way at the end of the day.
Somebody's asking if their curriculum coordinator can attend. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a nice sized group doing it virtually, so I'm really pleased about that.
Yeah. And just remember too that, I send it to the email program directors list in my email system, but share it with your faculty. Certainly they're welcome to come.
Yeah, especially since the next one is more relevant to all your faculty, the Quality Matters. So, all right, great, everybody. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on November 17th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.